forget and I stretch my legs out.
A lot closer than I thought.
Okay, everybody. Thank you very much. We're ready to get started, and we have two presentations tonight where we have people that are going to present directly to council here in the chambers, and the other ones are dealt with online. So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us regardless of what medium you're using. And I'd like to start with the Aboriginal Acknowledgement. So we would like to acknowledge the land of which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Kootenay, Silics and Sinix peoples, and is home to Métis and many diverse Aboriginal persons. We honour their connection to the land, rivers, and respect the importance of the environment to our strength as a community. And with that, there are no late items that I'm aware of, and I'd like a motion to adopt the minutes of the previous meeting, which was October the 26th, 2021. Councillor Woodward first moved, seconded by Councillor Lochtenberg. All in favour? Thank you very much. Now I'd like a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. Moved by Councillor Renwick, second by Councillor Lochtenberg. All in favour? Carried. And at this point, we allow participation from the public, and we don't have anybody, I believe, wanting to present to us tonight other than the ones that are on the agenda. Most people may or may not be aware, Sarah, that we can have people in council chambers again, but must be masked up. And I'm not talking to you at the moment, but if the general public comes in, they must be masked up in our council chambers. And if you do have, and you're watching tonight, and you do have something you wanted to bring to the attention of council, you could come to the council chambers and participate in that public participation part and make your presentation. So that piece is open to people now once again. So the first presentation tonight is on the agenda is Nelson Together update, I believe. Yeah. And with that, Marjorie, can you hear us okay? Good, okay, you've got the floor and you're...
I can. I'm just going to share screen so you can see the presentation. I'm hoping...
Yeah.
Where are we? I think
and you
this
can
is
introduce
it
yourself,
here.
Marjorie, and let us know who you are and what you do.
I will. I'm just looking to share screen with everybody, so this is the first time I've done this. I've just shared my presentation. Can you all see it on your end?
Yeah, I think it's coming up now. Yes, we got it now.
Yeah, it's a little bit slow. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay, so let me just move this out of the way here for you. No, can't do that. Okay. Okay, so good evening, everybody. My name is Margie Lesko, and I am Together Nelson's project manager. Thank you, Mayor Dooley and city councillors and staff. It's good to be here tonight. Today I'm co-presenting with Mallory Moore. Mallory's co-chair for Together Nelson's Leadership Roundtable, and you may also know her as the Service Accessibility Manager at Kootenay Career Development Services. So let's just see if I can, here we go. Okay, so the reason that we're here tonight is we'd like to provide you with an update on Together Nelson, which recently completed a community action strategy to reduce poverty in Nelson and area. Mallory will begin by sharing highlights of the strategy with you. I'll also talk about the strategy's highlights, our next steps, and how the city can stay involved going forward. As you know, this process has been supported by UBCM funding via city support to develop a local poverty reduction strategy in alignment with the Provincial Together BC poverty reduction strategy. Before we talk about the strategy on behalf of Nelson at its best, I would like to sincerely thank the city for supporting our application so we could engage in this important work in our community. I'd also like to extend a very big thank you for offering a city staff planning department member to sit on the leadership roundtable. Natalie Andrzejczyk's contributions were essential insightful, and her efforts, along with all the table members, were over and above what we originally asked. Natalie's participation has been an integral aspect of developing this strategy. So just want to start off and say thank you to the city for your support. And we wanted to give you an update on the strategy that's been developed. So Mallory, I think over to you now if you would like to talk about the highlights of the strategy a little bit.
Thanks, Margie. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Great. So thank you so much for having us here this evening. Together, Nelson's 4-year community action strategy marks the conclusion of a year of research, data analysis, community engagement.
One,
Yeah.
either you or Margie, I think Margie, you need to mute yourself. Okay.
Yep, I just don't know how to mute myself right now. I can't see my mute button because I'm sharing screen. Do I need to stop?
Okay, Margie, I just muted you, so you're good.
How's this? Is this better?
Yes.
I'm no longer in a team.
Don't feel bad. It happens to me all the time.
Yeah. It's a whole new world of in-person and out-of-person meetings, so there will be some kinks. I just want to recognize that this input for this plan, combined with the additional research from other community poverty reduction efforts, both provincially and nationally, expertise from Tamarack, Institute's Communities Ending Poverty, and Nelson at its Best End Poverty Initiative, guided the development of this community action strategy that we're going to share with you tonight. Next slide there, Margie. Thank you. So just to set the context, we're here today because over 2,100 community members in Nelson live below the poverty line. Often when we think of poverty, we think of those who are homeless, as you know from previous presentations. Nelson's homeless population represents 6%, which is 132 people, of the 18.6% community members who struggle under the weight of poverty in our community. So these are people that come from a variety of walks of life and are living many different situations. There are friends and neighbors, children, youth, adults, and seniors. And living in poverty includes situations such as being a parent, wanting to flee a violent or abusive relationship, wanting a safe and stable life for your children. Maybe you have a university degree, but you can't find livable wage employment. You can't find affordable housing or affordable childcare. Your current job was okay, it's part of a combined income as your partner worked full-time and you work part-time to care for your children. Training is available, but no affordable childcare, so you can't learn the new skills required for the roles that are available. What would you do? Stay in a violent, abusive relationship or leave, knowing that close to 50%, that's 1/2 of single parents in our community, live in poverty. So not everyone has a nest egg or cushion to rely on if their income status changes, and COVID has shown that many people live one or a few paychecks from not being able to pay their bills. Just to carry that story a little further, you might be a young single adult or a newly arrived immigrant looking for a job and a place to call home. Single person households make an average income of around $30,000, with the current average rental rate around $1,500 per month for a 2-bedroom suite. So at $750 per person, plus heat, you're spending over 30% of your income on housing, which really just isn't affordable. So together, Nelson's community action strategy to reduce poverty is really a historical first. So we're here also to celebrate this first and this first plan. It's our first community-based action strategy that reflects truly multi-sectoral leadership and community input. Strategy development was guided by diverse representatives participating on Together Nelson's Leadership Roundtable, representing multi-sector areas noted on the slide here. A broad range of community members also contributed their thoughts and ideas to inform the strategy. So people with previous or current experience of poverty, Indigenous people, local businesses, community leaders, frontline workers, local police, local government, and provincial government offices, including education, health, children and families, social development, and poverty reduction. Next slide, thanks, Margie. So together, Nelson works differently by embracing two concepts. The first is by using a collective impact approach to create, govern, and implement the strategy in our community. The second is by focusing on creating opportunities that support inclusive economic development, along with addressing high priority gaps in Nelson's poverty alleviation efforts. I'll explain these two concepts in the next two slides. So when we're talking about collective impact, we're talking about an innovative, community-based approach to solving the complex social challenge of ending poverty. It recognizes that organizations working in isolation are not the best route to creating desired social change, but rather a collective group of people and organizations from across all sectors working collaboratively in a structured way has great promise for creating targeted and lasting social change. The 5 key principles of the collective impact approach are noted on the slide here. This community action strategy represents our community's common agenda, where collaborative, multi-sector involvement has created a shared vision and strategies to address it, including opportunities that foster mutually reinforcing activities across organizations and a baseline of shared measurements that will enable Together Nelson to track progress and then continuously improve on efforts. And when we talk about economic inclusion, priority, this means that we're prioritizing creating opportunities that support economic development where we recognize everyone's right, regardless of gender, place of birth, family background, age, or other circumstances, to full and fair access to economic opportunity. Economic inclusion refers to the opening up of economic opportunities to underserved social groups and ensuring equal access to public goods and services, including education, housing, and transit. An inclusive economy is about investing in making our local economy more equitable from the bottom up, acknowledging that economic growth and inclusion is likely to be better for everyone's pocketbooks and for our community's collective well-being. So in this strategy, we're laser focused on supporting shared prosperity for people facing the greatest barriers to advancing their financial well-being and securing their futures. Finally, we believe that this community action strategy should focus on those who are most impacted by poverty in our community. So this strategy is data-driven and focuses on highest need with priority consideration given to the 2 largest groups currently experiencing poverty in Nelson: single-parent families and people working but still living in poverty. So these 2 groups represent 1,540 of the 2,100 plus community members that live below the poverty line in Nelson. We expect there's an overlap between these 2 groups. However, combined, they represent a significant number of people living in poverty in our community. Youth, adults, seniors, people living with a physical or mental disability, recent immigrants, and Indigenous peoples may also be experiencing financial hardship. And exact numbers are not known, and we expect that many of these demographic groups will more than likely be represented or overrepresented in our priority groups. So I'm going to hand it over to Margie to talk about the community action strategy itself and the priority actions and what's coming next. You're muted, Margie. We might need someone to take you off mute. You're still muted, Margie.
We're working on it here.
Yeah, Margie, I can't unmute you.
If it's helpful, Margie, it's at the bottom of my screen.
I can, let me just see. I can unmute everyone, and then everyone but Margie will have to mute themselves. I can try that. Okay. That worked. No.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Hi, sorry about that, everybody. You know, because I'm sharing screen, there's no mute or unmute option. I couldn't get any top bar to come down or anything. So thanks for your supporting me in that. Can you all hear me okay now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks so much, Mallory, for covering some of the strategies highlights. What I'd like to talk about now is I'd just like to share with you, what are we going to do? So what does the strategy propose? The strategy's pathways to change and recommended priority actions and impact are represented as a circle, which reflects Indigenous wisdom and ways of knowing. Wisdom that knows we are all connected, as our pathways to change and priority actions are connected to our community's overall strength and well-being. So community consultation combined with additional research that supports the development of this community action strategy has resulted in the identification of five priority pathways to change. They are employment and income, education and skill building, housing, transportation, and access to services. Along with these 5 priority pathways to change and the 16 recommended actions on here, we had over 100 suggested actions or solutions to reduce poverty. These suggested actions were prioritized into the top 16 recommended actions to affect the greatest change in reducing Nelson's poverty rate. And these actions, there's 3 or 4 actions around the periphery of this circle that align with the pathways to change. At the heart of Together Nelson's effort, the very heart of our effort, is our aim of reducing the current 18.6% poverty rate by 4% over the next 4 years by focusing our efforts on lifting 500 people, primarily in our 2 priority groups, out of poverty. So 500 people is close to 25% of Nelson's community members estimated to be in poverty. Oh, sorry about that. I'm going to stay there. And our community-based contribution to provincial and federal poverty reduction efforts. This number is based on low-income rates derived from 2019 tax filer data, if you're just interested. So strategy development occurred during COVID with data reflecting pre-COVID information. We don't know the impacts of COVID on income and mental health. We don't know whether income was lower due to shutdowns and job loss or higher due to government intervention that replicated basically a guaranteed basic income. 2022 will bring us 2020 data, which will better reflect the impacts of COVID in our community. But this strategy is a framework for change. It's built on the understanding that as we move forward, it is important to monitor our evolving environment, to learn as we go, and adapt when needed. The ripple effect. So Nelson is a central employment, education, recreation, service hub for people living in surrounding communities. Although the strategy assessed Nelson-based data and conducted Nelson-based community consultations, it will have a ripple effect beyond the city of Nelson by offering opportunities that have the potential to reduce poverty for many individuals and families who live in areas immediately surrounding Nelson. This strategy will also be presented to the RDCK Board of Directors in the near future. The development of this community action strategy acknowledges that ending poverty is a shared responsibility, where community has an important role to play. A shared responsibility across federal, provincial, municipal, regional governments, and communities. The federal government released a national poverty reduction strategy in 2018, which includes a commitment to reducing poverty by 50% by 2030. The BC government has also released a poverty reduction strategy in 2018, which aims to reduce poverty by 25% by 2024. Together Nelson's Community Action Strategy is an opportunity for our community, along with our local governments, to take actions that will contribute to, complement, or promote provincial and federal efforts, with this strategy setting a target for a further 25% reduction in local poverty, which is what I was talking about earlier, lifting 500 people up and over the poverty line. Altogether, collectively, we can end poverty in Canada. So that's the strategy highlights, really brief, really high level overview for you. What next? Now that the strategy has been released, been completed, what next? So we're organizing for success. Organizing for success, basically effectively advancing poverty reduction in our community, begins with adopting a collective impact approach and governance model. A collective impact governance structure has been put forward to implement this strategy that will enable multiple organizations and community leaders to support poverty reduction. A model where the efforts of everyone working collaboratively will enable the success of the strategy. This model will enable organizations and community leaders to support poverty reduction efforts through a community partner network, which you'll see on the slide here, that will directly involve 30 to 40 community leaders working as part of the backbone organization or the Community Voices Advisory Group, noted in teal, the Community Leadership Table, noted in blue on the slide, or noted in purple on the slide, one of 4 community action teams. Many more community members will be engaged through community consultations or participation in priority area activities. This model promotes the involvement of key people from diverse perspectives and expertise to work collaboratively, align activities with their respective sectors and organizations, cultivate community commitment, and mobilize resources to advance our community-driven work. And what next? So implementation. Together Nelson's 4-year implementation timeline is highlighted here. Year 1, noting that this 4-year plan really starts sort of midway next year in 2022. So the strategy is for 2022 to 2026. So year 1 has, I guess, 5 key stages to it or components to it. One is to gain endorsement of the community action strategy from key local government representatives and community leaders. Second is to identify a backbone organization or organizations to provide leadership, support collaborative efforts, and focus on collective impact conditions. Third is to establish the Community Voices Advisory Group to consult and advise on strategic directions, priorities, and activities. Fourth is to establish the Community Leadership Team to oversee and provide strategic guidance on the strategy's implementation. And fifth is to establish collaborative community action teams to work on moving pathways to change forward by digging deeper into the root causes of poverty in our community, by carrying out collaborative projects that further priority action items. Year 2 and 4 really focuses on implementing, monitoring, and evaluating the action plans that are developed by the action teams to further priority action items in our community. And year 4 will be an opportunity to reassess the need to continue or to repurpose the mandate or wind down the initiative in response to community needs. So what can the city do? Hopefully, this presentation and our previous presentation to Council earlier this year has provided you with a better understanding of poverty and the need of poverty reduction to rise to the fore in our community. This community action strategy is an opportunity for community and local government, the City of Nelson and RDCK to work together and contribute to provincial and federal efforts to reduce poverty with the end goal of eliminating poverty altogether in Canada. We invite the city to consider all 4 of these opportunities to support Together Nelson. Public endorsement of the strategy as a community priority would mean that the city is in agreement with the strategy's aims and activities and is happy to promote Together Nelson's poverty reduction work. So An example of that might be acknowledging the strategy's completion to the community via a city communique. So just to give you an example of what we mean by public endorsement. And I wanted to clarify that city endorsement is very important, if not critical, in attracting other community organizations to commit to support ongoing poverty reduction efforts in our fine city. I'd also like to note that endorsement is different. Point number 1 is different than point number 2 from becoming a partner. Nelson at its best will be reaching out to the city, separate from this presentation, to provide more detail on and discuss opportunities to join the community partner network. And in terms of sponsoring the next UBC funding application, Nelson Best will be asking the city to support a $50,000 UBCM funding request to implement this action strategy, much the same way that the city supported the UBCM funding application that supported the completion of the strategy. And that's due for submission in March of next year. So I guess if you haven't already had a chance to read the strategy and the 2-page infographic, please feel free to hop on to to our website and read the strategy to get a little bit more detail. So I guess at this point, I just wanted to say on behalf of Mallory and myself, thank you so much for your support of this initiative, for the opportunity to present to you today, and for any ongoing support the city is able to provide. I guess any questions now? I need to figure out how to stop sharing. So let's see if I can do that. Does anybody know how I stop sharing my screen? Oh, hang on, I just got, no I didn't. Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear
We
you.
all hear you.
Oh, I'm muted.
For $50, Councillor Page will help you. Or maybe it's 65.
Oh,
He's undercutting
I'm
my
so
rate.
sorry. It's my first time on WebEx, and it's just I'm a neophyte when it comes to this.
Well,
So
we
how do I
could
stop
probably
sharing my
manage
screen?
Margie, I think we could manage with it if you just want to leave it.
Yeah, okay. Sure, you bet. So I guess if there's any questions,
Okay, so questions? Councillor Lochtenberg has one. We're getting a bit of feedback, so somebody's not muted someplace.
I'm not muted.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marjorie and Mallory, for that presentation. We're getting the feedback. Okay.
Margie, Control M will mute and unmute you.
Ooh, let's try that. I'm on a Mac, so I'll try Command M. How does that work? Am I muted?
Nope.
Sorry.
No. Okay, I'll try Option M.
That was free advice.
How's that?
Still.
Yes.
Nope.
No.
Oh, Control M, I've done. Right there.
No.
Option M. Command M.
Shift Command M.
Shift Command M. Okay, let's do that.
Yeah, that seemed to work.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. And it'll be Shift Command M to unmute, Marjorie, when you're ready to answer. Okay, so looking at the strategy in the report, you spent quite a bit of time looking at the lay of the land when it comes to poverty in Nelson. One of the things I did not see, and maybe you can speak to it, maybe I missed it, or you can just speak to it, is who's doing what currently? So for example, we've got 5 strategy areas, including skills development, and it seems to me I would have expected to see mention of, say, community futures and the Nelson Area Economic Development Partnership, Chamber of Commerce. Do you have the Selkirk College. And do you have at your fingertips, or is it embedded in this report that I missed, a good survey of which organizations are doing what and where the sort of priority areas are that are being not effectively covered by the existing organizations? Do you have something like that for us?
Okay, look, I found the mute unmute. I figured that one out. That's a great question. In terms of, maybe I'll give you a bit more background. I think that was Councillor Page that was talking to me. I'm not sure, I couldn't see. In terms of what I'm hearing you ask is, did we touch base with major organizations like CFCK, NAADP, Selkirk College, Chamber in terms of what they're doing? And what we had is we had Community Future. We had representation from the community on the leadership roundtable that guided this. So we had Community Futures on here, CFCK. We had a local large business representative. We had so that was one method of input into the strategy to help shape this. The other opportunity was during community consultations. We consulted with Selkirk College, representatives from Selkirk College, and we consulted with a variety of stakeholders around the community. So frontline workers, health, families, education was on the leadership roundtable. And so between leadership roundtable and the community consultations, and if you take a look in the strategy in Appendix B, you'll see the community consultation outcomes, who participated in that. And if you look in the strategy in the acknowledgements, you'll see who's on the leadership roundtable. So from those two areas, that's how we found out what was happening in the community or who had input into the strategy. So we don't have an inventory of everything happening in the community. We have a list of services and initiatives, actually. We do have that, that also helped shape this. And the list of services and initiatives came during a community consultation. We had over 70 community members participate. So is that kind of what you're interested in finding out, what services and initiatives are currently in place in our community?
Well, more specifically, I was looking for. You may need to mute again.
And if I may, Control Shift Z pulls down your sharing. She's in the corner. I think the format's changed. Control Shift Z.
Marjorie? Okay, good. I guess what I'm looking for is when I look at this strategy, it proposes 5 areas to focus on. It proposes a structure, including a backbone organization, a leadership table, and so on. What I'm not clear on is, what are we doing today to reduce poverty? What does the lay of the land look today amongst the various interlocking organizations? And where are the gaps that we would really want to focus on? It would give me a better sense of how this strategy would look when it hits the ground.
Yeah. Okay, so what we did when we had our community consultations, we actually identified 10 key barriers and gaps that the community told us that we have. And so if you take a look again at that Appendix B, which is the What We Heard report from the community consultations, in there's the 10 barriers and gaps. And those barriers and gaps then formed the creation of this strategy. The barriers and gaps included, let me see if I actually have that here. They included transportation. They included affordable housing, which are pathways to change. They included access to employment and employment opportunities. So the pathways to change all address the top 10 barriers and gaps that we heard our community tell us. So does that answer your question, Mallory? You want to add anything?
Margie, do you mind if I add something, Margie?
Please do.
I see you're muting. Perfect. I think this is a great question, and maybe I can speak to it from someone who works full-time at KCDS and saw a lot of things come up in our community consultations around, there's nothing for job seekers in our community. And I'm like, That's strange because we do a lot of good job seekers in our community. And so I think what we're looking to do with the action strategy is to kind of fill in those gaps a little bit, because if folks are saying in the community, I don't know where to go to look for work, but I'm saying, hey, I know a lot of resources that are available. It's not so much that the resource isn't there, but there's some communication mechanism that's not working, or maybe those specific programs aren't working for specific populations because of other barriers. So I think that if that helps a little bit in terms of how we're going to go about building out these action plans from the strategy.
Yeah, that helps, Mallory. Thank you.
No problem.
Councillor Renwick.
Marjorie and Mallory, thank you very much. That was a great presentation. If we can refer to your fourth slide, as I was reading your report, your presentation on the weekend, I was shocked when I saw your 18.6 2,100 people number, and I've got two questions. Number one, I guess, is when I look at the national and provincial averages and ours, why we're so much higher. If you have an answer for that, I'm not sure. And the other is, in my research, of course, I went to StatsCan, and I see that there's 3 ways to measure poverty: low income cutoff, low income measure, and market basket measure. And we've got low income measure for your poverty rate for Nelson, but provincial and national are measured under market basket measure. Can you clarify some of that for me? Sorry.
You bet. I'm really glad that you did some research, and that's a fantastic question. Measuring poverty is a little bit tricky, as you can tell from that question. The poverty rate, there's 2 reasons that there's the poverty rate is so different. You've noticed that it's much higher in Nelson than it is provincially and nationally, and historically, rural poverty rates are significantly higher than provincial and federal poverty rates. Sorry, urban poverty rates is what I meant to say. And so that's one explanation. And the other is, you're correct, the market basket measure is for the provincial and the federal poverty rates. But Nelson's poverty rate is actually a low income measure. And the reason that it's low income measure is that we don't have any data in Nelson. It's really hard for small communities to actually have market basket measure data. So we have low income measure that we got through Selkirk, through the Selkirk College's Research and Development Institute. They just released that information based on 2019 tax filer data, which only became available in September. And so the low-income measure it's a different measure, and it does tend to measure slightly higher or higher in general, but it's all we have. And the data is the data, and the data does clearly indicate that the poverty rate is high, and the reasons for that is typically it is higher in rural environments, and the measure is slightly different, and the reason for measure is data availability. But we still know that it indicates poverty is higher in our community. Mallory, did you want to add anything to that? Does that answer your question?
It does somewhat. Thank you. Can I have a follow-up?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So we all know that it costs more to live in Nelson. Does that increase our poverty rate? It must.
You know what? That's a great question. The living wage was just calculated for Nelson. It was just released a couple weeks ago, and last year the living wage was $18.46 an hour. So that's what you need for a basic minimum living wage to be well and truly above the poverty line, and meet your basic needs. This year is calculated, it's $1.10 more, it's $19.56 an hour. And when it's compared, like if you hop onto the Living Wage Campaign for BC, if you hop onto their website, you can see that Nelson is actually one of the highest in the region, it's higher than on Victoria, on Vancouver Island. It's a higher living wage. So I don't know whether that's shipping for Nelson or why Nelson is a higher livable wage, but it is one of the highest in southern BC and the island, if not the highest. So I think that certainly could contribute. Yeah, Nelson for some reason is higher.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions? Councillor
Well, just to follow up on Councillor Renwick's question, is there a low income measure for the province of BC so we could compare on the low income measure?
Canada.
Income measure.
12.1%.
12.1% for Canada. Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Did you just answer your question down there already?
For Canada, yeah.
For Canada, yeah.
Yeah, for Canada there is, but not the province. Yeah, I wasn't sure. I couldn't quite hear you. So, yeah.
Great, thanks.
Great, thanks.
John? And Councillor Woodward? And Councillor Page.
Thank you, Mallory and Marjorie. I guess I was thinking, as I was listening to Councillor Renwick's questions, I was thinking about, Nelson is a very sought after place to live, and we don't have a major industry. Housing is extremely expensive. Like, there's a lot of pieces there that make Nelson pretty unaffordable to a lot of people. And I always kind of struggle with this this element, because there's so many people out there in our town who are working to make our town even better, and that there's so many NGOs that are trying to do great work, like what you're doing. And in some ways, we make our town better and better, and it becomes even more and more sought after. So it's this kind of it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I think people want to be here because we are a compassionate community in many ways, and it's beautiful. I guess I'm just wondering, you want to make our town affordable, but it's a challenge when it's such a beautiful place to be, and there's no industry. So I'm just wondering, how do we work around these sort of monumental issues? I mean, I really appreciate your report, and it's wonderful. It's a wonderful beginning. But I'm just wondering if you can comment on some of those things.
You're right. It might feel like a bit of a catch-22, and one of the interesting things that Mallory was talking about that we're wanting to do differently is we're really wanting to focus on economic development and economic inclusion, so that our recommendations, our priority actions, we're actually looking at the feasibility of establishing a socially responsible organization, a social enterprise, I should say, not socially responsible, and having a business forum on livable wages. So when we're focusing on our community's well-being, we're taking a different approach. We're focusing less on poverty alleviating efforts and more on reducing poverty by looking at the economic well-being of our community and how we can support that, specifically targeted as economic inclusion for those that are more vulnerable to financial hardship in our community, so that our community benefits overall, but we're not attracting people from outside of the community. It's actually to support people who are already here and struggling to make ends meet, targeting towards our priority considerations, which are single parent families and people who are working and but not making a livable wage. It's amazing how many organizations pay less than a living wage, and organizations that you wouldn't think that are pretty big.
Thank
I
you.
think that was a bit circuitous of an answer, but I hope that sort of shed a bit of light on your question.
Yeah, I mean, sorry. You're mute.
There's a mute.
I kind of, it's always interested me about Zoom or
Can't write
Teams or how they couldn't put the mute button in a simple
Right.
place on the screen.
Right in the middle
They got
of
to
the
tuck it away
screen.
in a corner somewhere where you got to play around. Like, why isn't it, I can't believe it's not in the dead center of the screen. You just hit it with your finger and it's
no.
always in this obscure place.
Thank you. I mean, it's a problem I've been trying to figure out in my own head for a long time, and I'm always amazed at the incredible wealth of NGOs we have working on different issues in this town. It's just, phenomenal when you sit at these committee tables and such. So thank you for your work, and it's, keep going. It's wonderful.
Councillor Page.
Thank you. I also really appreciate the collaboration that's gone on to bring forward this plan, which is quite detailed, and obviously a lot of work has gone into it. Just picking up on some of the things that have been said around the table, I would just articulate and remind everyone the importance of separating out market values from social values. Oftentimes, we look out and we see a problem that needs to be solved, the commodification of the of our property and what this town is and how nice and beautiful and how easy it is to sell it for a high price. And then on the tail end of that, how that has an effect on the people and the residents that live in the city today. Our community is doing really well. And if anything, that is more of a call to us to be able to help and support the people that are not being brought up with us. And that doesn't mean, everyone is going to be on an equal footing, but it really certainly means that we have the resources and capacity to make sure that we're solving some of the problems for those single mothers that you see popped up, running their families, working one job, taking care of kids and trying to make ends meet, trying to make sure that how affordable housing opportunities are being had, that coordination and programming and facilitation is being had so that we can understand the problems as it impacts these different residents and demographics. It's just, we cannot solve all of our community problems by simply looking to the market to solve them through some sort of pricing scheme or pricing logic. And so that is just one place I think we get tied up a lot, and we just really have to work hard in these kinds of conversations to separate that out of what do we want in our community from a social value, and what do we want the market to provide, and that those are different things. And we do tend, I think, in this modern society to forget that they're very separate things, and the market is not here to be society, it's just a function of society. And so I see a lot of the social values brought forth in this conversation and in this report that we see here, and it's meant to inform us so that we can help people bridge the gap and be active, productive participants that bring their skill, their talent, and their resources to the labor market, because we've had this conversation at the economic development table on how not solving these problems as people try and bridge this gap is holding places like Revelstoke, Fernie, and our own community back from economic opportunity that would grow the pie, as it were, because people are not able to get the basic things that they need met, and they're just under way too much pressure. And so we need to look for those places like this, these coordinated spaces, and I hope we will refer this piece to a public meeting or to a business meeting for endorsement, or do we pass a motion at this table to endorse it?
We bring it back.
Yeah, bring it back.
Well, I would move that we refer it to a future business meeting to bring back for endorsement. And I thank you guys for your work. There's no question in there, just a speech.
Thanks, Councillor Page.
Thanks,
Any
Councillor
further?
Page. Any further?
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just want to thank you. That was very well said, Councillor Page. And, the whole idea behind this, or part of the idea behind this too, is that creating these action teams are an opportunity to explore in terms of affordable housing, in terms of transportation, in terms of economic development in our community. And just a really interesting piece of information I'd love to share with you. Banff just had a housing development completed, and that housing development, the city purchased land, and the housing development has been sold at not at market value, but cost to build value. so that it can actually be supported, it can actually be targeted towards people that can't afford market value houses. So that's just an interesting example to have an idea of many different opportunities that we can look at in the city to see how we can make our community more supportive for all of our community members to be more financially stable, and for opportunities to to support our community members, as opposed to opportunities to attract more people to the community, which I can't remember which councillor had mentioned that. So anyhow, just an interesting example of what other communities are doing in the province.
Any further questions? There was a, go ahead.
Just a couple. One is, that was an interesting point by Mallory in terms of, the services that are available. And I know, I saw unaffordable education. However, Selkirk College, all upgrading is free. We have a number of organizations that provide skill development. As Councillor Page identified, the number one thing that came out at economic development was a workforce shortage. So, I think your timing's pretty good in terms of, there's certainly a demand for employees. I think the college has a number of programs they're being funded for to support skill development. And any discussion, well, two things, any discussion with the CBT, where's the CBT in terms of, this as a priority? And second of all, how much in alignment is this with the provincial and Canadian strategies? Is there a chance to piggyback on their programs and where our gaps are? And my sense also is, this seems to be done at the community level as opposed to the individual level. Do we have any sense of, of those 500 individuals you're hoping to move out of that, above that poverty line? Are there people that are, or 100 of those just need some skill development, or they just need childcare? Or I assume you're not at that level yet, but is that part of what would happen, that we identify actually these 50 people, if we just did this, we'd get there with 50. They're not the they're I guess, for a lack of a better word, I hate to use this, but the low-hanging fruit, people that are not that far away from being able to make that jump.
I wasn't sure, Mallory, if you want to answer that. Okay, do you want to answer that? I got 3 out of 4 of your questions. I think I might have missed your first question, so I'm going to answer about CBT and provincial and Canadian strategy alignment and the 500 people, what's needed to get those people up and over the poverty line. And if there was another question at the beginning, I'm not sure if I got it. And maybe when I'm finished, if I missed something, if you can let me know if there was another question, I'd appreciate it. So CBT actually did partially fund this work. Our primary funder was UBCM, but CBT was also funding this work. And Nelson It's Best will be having conversations with different funding organizations, including CBT. And so, at this point, really, the strategy is completed, and there's that sort of a period between implementing the strategy and completing it. So it's completed now. Implementing, we're expecting to be occurring in the middle of next year to start. And this interim period is really to confirm the backbone organization, to confirm funding opportunities, to confirm priorities for funding. I don't think we expect that all the action teams will be every cab off the rank as soon as 2022 occurs. So yes, short answer, CBT will be approached. CBT has been supportive, and whether that support will be ongoing, we will confirm. But I hope I hope, and I guess I can say expect. I hope that they will continue to be supportive. So that's CBT's involvement so far has been supportive. And then I think you asked about provincial and Canadian strategies. Is it an opportunity to align or to piggyback? And it's more working in collaboration, and there might be some advocacy components. There might be advocacy, certainly, that came up in community consultations around income and employment opportunities, is to advocate to the provincial government and to the federal government for a guaranteed basic income. So there's opportunities to advocate and align that way, I think what we're trying to do with the strategy is look at what opportunities do we have locally that we can implement locally. And so the strategy that we put together aligns with Together BC, the provincial strategy. It aligns with the levers of change in that strategy, the priority areas in that strategy, but it reflects our own community consultations. It reflects what we heard from our community, what we heard from our leadership roundtable. Our community told us the top 10 barriers and gaps. Number one was a limited number of well-paying, stable, ongoing jobs. I stopped at the bank the other day. I won't say which bank, but I stopped at a bank, and I had to wait a long time to be served. And I said, hey, why am I waiting such a long time? What's going on? We can't get staff. Why can't you get staff? What are you paying your employees? Well, they start at around less than $18 an hour. Well, that's not a livable wage. So, that's one of the top barriers and gaps. Is that affordable housing was the second barrier or gap. Childcare was the third. Access to mental health care services was the fourth, which we address in streamlining services and having a community network or hub to bring all services together. Transportation was another one, and childcare, transportation, housing are all part of the provincial strategy too. So this is what we heard locally, and much of it aligns with the provincial strategy. That's just some of it. I don't want to go on too much because I get into the detail because I'm so immersed in this. So I'm going to leave it at that. And in terms of answering the question around lifting 500 people out of poverty, what do we know what the low-hanging fruit is for that? And we know who our priority considerations are. We know that single parents and people who are who are working but not making a living wage are two major groups. We have, out of 2,100 people in Nelson, over 1,500 fall into those two groups. That's a significant portion. And in terms of low-hanging fruit, some people, to be just bumped over the line, might need something like to attend a tax clinic, to know how to streamline their taxes, how to get the RSP contributions. So that's one of our key recommendations, is trying to bump people up over the line that way. But we don't actually have a lot of detail. We can't say, yeah, this is exactly who it is and what they need. That's where the action plans, when the action teams come into play, they will then dig back into the data a little bit more, because we'll have a year and a half worth of data that's been collected and more recent. So they'll look more closely into the data, and they will come up with an actual action plan. And that action plan will be clear on targets and measures in terms of who's going to be lifted out of poverty and who are we aiming our actions for in those 5 pathways to change. So I hope that answers your question, and I'm not sure if you had a question at the start of that I missed.
Kevin, I want to wind up here. Yeah. So, Marjorie and Mallory, thank you very much. There was a couple of things that kind of popped out at me that you mentioned that I thought were good ideas. And there's a lot of good ideas, don't get me wrong, but there's a couple in particular that you talk about the economic inclusion, and I think we actually checked the box fairly well on the education side. Our schools in School District 8 ranked very high in the province in their outcomes, and of course the college is high ranked in the amount of diverse programs that they offer at Selkirk. The other one is the transit side, and that's identified there on that slide. And we have done a lot of work, as Councillor Lochtenberg could attest to, on a regional strategy around transportation, transit, whether it be from, as an example, linking up with the Kootenay Lake Ferry to up the Slocan Valley, all the way to Trail Nelson Castlegar. And now we have a sporadic bus service into Salmo, I think, which it'd be awesome if that was a more regular system. On the housing side, you know, we all know around this table there's always more you can do. But, you know, we have delivered a lot of housing in Nelson that is supposedly in the affordable category for people. And recently we're looking at now, with the blessing, by the way, of Minister Eby, a regional strategy around, you know, why just focus in on Nelson for a lot of these ideas? Why not look at a regional strategy to help offset the housing challenge, as an example, where land may be more available, more affordable, etc., maybe closer to people where they're raised or where they want to live, as an example. And the other piece was in your presentation, you talked about making this presentation to the Regional District of Central Kootenay. And I think that's a wonderful idea. But I'd like you to look at that maybe in conjunction with the Regional District of Kootenay boundary, as an example, because even tonight, for example, we had a visit to our treatment plant, and Councillor Page and I rode together, and getting onto the highway, you know, the traffic's going equally, almost equally in both directions from Nelson to wherever, out of town, heading towards Castlegar. And we know from some of the traffic studies we've seen over the years that the traffic volumes are very similar between Nelson Trail, Castlegar Trail, Nelson, Castlegar, vice versa. You can lay it out any way you want, but people are choosing to, you know, live in Castlegar and work in Nelson, and vice versa. So what I'm actually trying to ask you is it possible to have a more regional look at this? Because maybe the low-hanging fruit, as Kevin mentioned, is maybe better transit to where there is more affordable housing, as an example, or where people are living to find employees. And the last slide, it talks about 50% federal, 25% provincial. I'm just wondering what our 25% would look like.
Wow, thank you, Mayor Dooley. You've got a lot of fantastic questions. I'm just going to start at the top in terms of all the different points that you made and try and respond. You know, you had said something about economic inclusion, seeing how that's something a little bit new, I think is what I heard, and talking about education, how we're really on top of education. And, you know, when we're talking about education, I think we're not just talking about graduation rates. We're also talking about content, like financial literacy. People are coming out of school and don't know what credit is. People are coming out of school and they don't know what a budget is. People are coming out of school and they don't know how to do online banking. So financial literacy, I think, is one of the things we're talking about, is really better understanding what are loans, what are mortgages, what is credit, what is budgeting. And that is something that kids aren't getting in school these days, and that's something that has been piloted through Nelson at its best and been very successful in lifting people up and over out of poverty, helping them get employment and helping them manage their money a bit better. So in terms of education, I just wanted to add that as another level of understanding around what we mean when we're talking about education. It's not just graduation rates. It's those people that are graduating but are maybe coming from families where they're not having that financial literacy component presented in a family atmosphere. Transit, transit, it's fantastic that we're doing the work that we are around revising. I know RDCK just approved that transit plan to be revisited over the next couple of years. And that is really good news. In terms of how this strategy would work with that, is really hoping to, obviously leverage the strengths of what is existing in our community, but bring a poverty lens to that, so that when we are looking at revising our transportation, we're also considering that people that are working jobs that are shift work or are multiple jobs that there's no late night buses, there's no middle of the night buses, There's, how are we meeting transportation needs for multi-job, multi-shift workers? And so that's the lens that we would hope to bring to the fantastic work that has been initiated through the province and through RDCK, through the city, around revising our current transportation. So just bring that lens of people that are lower income and struggling with what their needs are that maybe are not always getting met, to facilitate employment, to facilitate education, to facilitate community involvement. So let's see, what else did I hear you say? Housing, affordable housing. Yeah, I wish I had some numbers, Mayor Dooley, where I could talk about affordable housing and what that means. I know I don't know if there's specific affordable housing in Nelson that's being built. I know there's a lot more duplexes and multiplexes coming up, but I wish I had a number for you that I could say this is what we mean by affordable housing, and I don't have that in front of me. So maybe I can get that to you, because I would love to be able to just give you an idea of what that means. So if I can easily find that, I'd be happy to send that to you if you'd be interested. The strategy in terms of revising it to be a regional strategy, I mean, the strategy was originally funded, designed, proposed to be a Nelson strategy. We really realize that Nelson does have a ripple effect. That's why we appreciate that the areas E and F, but also Salmo, the Valley, and they have high poverty rates. They have let's see, I think the Valley is 40% and Salmo's 23%, or it's the other way around. Do you remember, Mallory? Anyhow, we expect there'll be some, that ripple effect will affect those communities. If, we originally talked about an affordable housing strategy, a longer term strategy, whether that's Nelson based or regional, what I guess we'll see when the action teams come into play, and I appreciate your idea. Yeah, I think, 25%. That's what the other question, wasn't it, Mayor Dooley? So the 25%, so let's say we have 18.6% of our communities in poverty, and half of that 18.6%, so that's what, 9.3% is what the federal commitment is to try and reduce to 9.3%. And then the province is going to say, we're going to take another 25%, which is, what's 4.5, 4.6, just over 4.65%. And then the rest is at a local level. So that 4% poverty reduction that we talk about in the strategy, taking 18.6 down to 14.6, that 4% is basically our 25% contribution. So 2,100 people, 25% of 2,100 people is just over 500, but we just chose a round number, to be honest with you, so that we could strive towards that. So does that answer your questions, in particular the latter one?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would suggest you maybe qualify the piece around the education piece in the schools, what's being offered. It might be a good thing to qualify that that kids are not getting that type of instruction that you identified. Okay, thank you very much. Good. Yes.
So Councillor Page may need a seconder for his motion to bring it to a regular meeting and then just to receive it.
I can second that.
Motion to receive, yeah.
I can second Councillor Page's motion.
Second by Councillor Lockenberg. All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, next up.
Then move to receive.
I'll move to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Library budget? Tracy is going to give us a presentation on the library budget. And welcome, Tracy. I know you're probably chief, this is your first kick at a committee of the whole. Sometimes they can be a half an hour, sometimes they can be 2 hours, and sometimes even longer, so.
That's good. It was interesting to hear
Yeah.
about the report.
Yeah.
The library was part of some of those consultations
Yeah,
as well.
right,
so
exactly, yeah.
It was neat to see it all come together.
Thank you, and you have, I think you have Annie with you as well?
Yes,
Yeah.
you do.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Annie.
Hi. You guys are small out there, but I can see you.
Folks. And do we have access to the presentation? Yeah, Sarah's getting that. Great.
Tracy, do you mind lifting that microphone up a little bit, please? Yeah, those microphones have to be almost right in front of your face to work, and
I'll go for it.
if you're a quiet person like you are,
Right.
then they really have to be in front of you.
Okay,
Here, please.
I'll raise my voice. So Annie's joining us from Victoria, I think. Is that right, Annie?
The nomadic chair.
Yeah. Yes, her nomadic chair, that's right.
How's the atmospheric river down there?
It was pretty, well, it was beautiful today, actually. We saw whales out in the street and had full sun.
Nice.
Yeah. Waiting for the next divulge. Yeah.
That too.
Is that much water?
Not much water, yeah. Straight, not street.
I do have it on a thumb drive.
This isn't
Okay.
connecting to that.
Oh, okay. Slow.
Spinning.
Sarah's become an
I
IT
kn- totally,
person
eh?
over all of this.
Yeah.
She's had to learn
Oh,
all kinds of things.
I know.
So much tech.
Keith's trying to lure her away.
I was just gonna crack. You got there first.
Can you move the,
Sure.
Stealing all my jokes.
is that what,
Take her in a second.
is the,
Maybe the power's not on.
was it, it went to sleep?
Yeah, let me, here. I've got it back on.
Sorry.
The library was much more simple in 1920.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is why. Okay. It should just kick over, but. Oh, it was sleeping. Nice, man.
Oh, there we go. Okay, I'll be right back.
Together, Nelson.
Well-to-do person's house
You got it figured? PC not It's on the screen.
Oh, wow.
Okay, that's it.
we do all have it.
Yeah, we have it in the, on our computers here.
Sarah can catch up.
Sorry.
Do you have it in front of you?
Yeah, I do.
You've got it?
I do. And just make sure I can move from screen to screen or page to page. Yeah.
Oh, lost it. There we go. Yeah.
So you can see it?
I can see it.
Okay, that's strange. It's not, so the public can't see it.
Right, yeah, the PC got disconnected. Was it called in before?
It was working like with Nelson at its best, so I don't really. You know what,
There we go.
Magic.
We got to start, Nate, here.
It's a start.
Can you control it?
Yeah. Is that good enough?
There we go. That'll work.
Should I get
Oh,
the
God.
Full screen.
dare try full screen?
Yeah, full screen should be fine.
Full screen. There's our lovely image. Thank you, Sarah. So, shall we get started now? Everyone can
Absolutely.
hear me?
Yeah.
Great. So, yes, good evening. And as well, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Tracy Terrian, Chief Librarian with the Nelson Public Library. And we have Annie Holtby, who is our Library Board Chair with us remotely. And so I'll just pass it over to Annie right now.
Yeah, we'd like to start today by thanking you, Mayor Dooley and councillors, for the opportunity to speak with you tonight about our library. I'd like to start by also thanking the City Council and City staff for your ongoing support and your advocacy at a provincial level at UBCM and with Minister Osborne of the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. It's great now that we have public libraries, that public libraries have synergy with our city and regional district governance as part of the municipal affairs portfolio. And of course, the major role of the board is to create the strategic directions for the library, which then the chief librarian and staff implement. Our three focus areas, shown in the top there, are community needs, sustainability, and spaces to connect. And these also align with the city's strategic directions that are below in gray.
Thanks, Annie. So I'll be sharing the activities and services the library offered in 2021 and how the library continued to adapt and adjust, responding to the needs of the community during the second year of the pandemic.
Tracy, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Okay, I'll speak a little louder. Is that better, Annie? Okay.
Now I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, great. So the library, as Annie mentioned, the library's strategic plan continued to guide us and help us explore how our services intersect and assist with the city's priorities. So like the city, the library serves all. We serve people from all socio and economic backgrounds and different cultural backgrounds. We serve newcomers, Indigenous people, families, seniors, job seekers, small business owners, and the underhoused. The library makes up part of the city's social infrastructure. So those are those foundational services that support the quality of life of a city. So another integral piece that makes the library what it is our library staff, the library's most important asset. Every day you'll find library staff guiding people through the maze of information to find resources, whether for personal, professional, or for entertainment. We help people with technology, building those digital literacy skills. We support parents to help their children to read and find information for school projects. So, as mentioned earlier, the library makes up part of the city's social infrastructure, those foundational services that support the quality of life of residents and make a community an appealing place for everyone to live. This slide here identifies 3 areas that demonstrate how public libraries are contributing to social infrastructure and building community resilience. So the first one is access to information. So the World Health Organization has declared an infodemic, which is too much information, including false or misleading information during a disease outbreak. It causes confusion and risk-taking behaviors that can harm health. It also leads to mistrust in health authorities and undermines public health response. So libraries play a role in helping combat misinformation by sourcing and providing authoritative information. Library staff are trained to guide people in finding accurate information, and also helping develop those critical thinking skills, including questioning the information they're receiving or finding online. The library is a trusted source of information, providing varied viewpoints to let people explore and determine their own views. This type of environment is an ideal space to promote respectful dialogue in a growing polarized world. Pass it to Annie now.
Secondly, economic development. Libraries allow community members to explore options and find support in changes they may be making in their professional lives. For example, our library's Tech Hub has equipment to support online commerce for online sales, recording videos, or podcasts. All you need is a library card. Another example is our partnership with Community Futures. Their small business development program includes training from librarians demonstrating effective research skills and library resources like the Tech Hub and other online training tools like LinkedIn Learning to support your business plans.
So thirdly is the climate crisis. In addition to providing space to shelter from extreme weather like the heat, smoke, floods, landslides, the library supports mental wellness of community by creating and supporting community connections, helping battle social isolation and providing a space for people to come together to share and develop solutions. Speaking to my colleagues last week in the Fraser Valley and the Cedar Sky Corridor and in the Okanagan, they talked about supporting a number of misplaced people due to the floods and landslides. People that can't get to their homes are using the libraries to access the internet, computers, and also just finding a warm place, a bit of a sanctuary away from all the turmoil. So as you can tell, this is a part of librarianship that I'm really passionate about. And at the end of the presentation, you'll see there's some more information on libraries and how they support these different areas. So community needs. The next few slides will take you through some library programs and services that demonstrate our strategic priority of community needs. So the pandemic created an opportunity for residents to discover, many for the first time, the library's online collection of ebooks and online audiobooks. It was also an opportunity to discover other online library resources, such as our subject guides, developed and curated by library staff. So here on the right is an example from our website. Each topic links to authoritative information, either paid through library subscriptions or for free information. Website traffic statistics have risen significantly over this last year, illustrating that community members, in addition to using our physical collection, are discovering more of our library's online resources. Our Library of Things supports digital literacy, but also provides activities for families, especially during COVID, when travel and large gatherings are limited. Other items include ukuleles, radon detectors, mini synthesizer, programmable robots, thermal cameras, anti-racism, and anti-bullying kits. So I'm just going to take you to this 2-minute 2-minute video of our Tech Hub. Just gives you an overview of what's happening in the library there. And I hope some sound will work here as well. Is it just coming from here?
Hi, my name is Lindsay and I'm here to introduce you to the new Nelson Public Library Tech Hub. In this video, I'll show you the equipment and software available to help you create your own videos or podcasts, digitize, edit, and create on a Surface Studio, and our full creative suite of software. Follow me. First up, here we have the Digitization Station, where we make it possible to update analog items to digitize and preserve them. Now let's head downstairs to the studio. has never been a better time to start a podcast for your business, brand, or as a personal hobby. We know that choosing the best podcasting, recording, or video setup can get confusing. So to make it easy, we have put together an all-inclusive package. A quiet room, a green screen, lights, camcorder, a video mic, a high-quality microphone, an audio interface, a foam shield, a sound recording program. We also encourage you to use your own equipment if you have it, like your own camera. And here in the editing station, you can add final touches to your creations with our Surface Studio and our full creative suite of software. Now that we have you thinking about how you would create your own amazing videos or podcasts, we encourage you to learn more by watching our next 2 videos as well, as taking the time to research how to set it up for yourself, or bring a friend that already knows what they're doing and have them get you started. You can book the space by contacting us. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you at the library.
Sorry, that was a little choppy, but you got the idea.
You'll have to
Okay.
go to YouTube to see it in all its glory.
That's right, and there's more videos on the website that give you more instruction for the different rooms as well. Let's see, where am I at? Also, the pandemic highlighted that those without access to technology were left behind. Students and workers switched to online learning and working. Essential services like doctor's appointments went online, as did being able to connect with friends and families. So if you didn't have access to the internet or a computer, it's difficult to participate in society. Actually, in BC, 5% of people don't have home internet, and only 38% of rural communities have access to recommended broadband internet speeds. So in Nelson, here, we witnessed families in cars parked outside the library building using library Wi-Fi to connect to the internet. So by providing these Chromebook laptops and offering Wi-Fi, we're just helping bridge that digital divide. So we learned about the importance and the human need to connect with others and how that combats the negative effects of social isolation and improves mental health. The following slides demonstrate how the library supports community connections. So this image here is the Mother-Daughter Book Club, a really dedicated group of people that come together monthly to discuss the books they're reading and their love of reading. So in June, we reintroduced seating in the library. We saw people return gradually at first, and we're seeing more and more to use the library as they did pre-COVID. So we've not yet reinstated our full capacity of seating due to COVID restrictions, but we're hearing from community members how good it feels to be able to leave their homes and reintegrate into public spaces like the library. And this summer, when we were having the extreme heat, we made sure we had space inside the library for people to sit, to cool off, access water, and also to be able to reach out to library staff if they needed help. In 2021, library staff started to introduce a hybrid approach to meeting community needs. We brought people together outside, and more recently, we're bringing people together in the library. Teens especially, though, were very vocal about not wanting to meet online. But one participant shared with us that they couldn't meet in person at the library because of a disability that meant they couldn't walk or drive. So our plan moving forward is to continue to offer both in order to eliminate those barriers. So we know that Indigenous, Black, and racialized people and people with disabilities and those that were already marginalized were disproportionately affected by the pandemic. At the same time, people have become increasingly polarized at a time when it's most needed that we really come together to recover from the impacts of the pandemic. These images here are examples of library resources and programs that help build community understanding and cohesion. Our key objectives with this priority are ensuring our programs and services are delivered efficiently and effectively, that we communicate about our value, that the board focuses on governance and advocacy, and that we're conscious of our environmental footprint. We partnered with other organizations to deliver online programs jointly to reach a broader audience and support staff by sharing the workload. You know, Nelson Public Library staff are leaders in the region in doing this. They're developing ideas, seeking funding, creating procedures, marketing, and facilitating joint online programming. In 2021, the Friends of the Library reintroduced their book sales. Though reduced in size, it's a step towards returning to their regular large sales that help support the library fundraising along with other initiatives like the library's magazine drive. Earlier this month, we welcomed back library volunteers after close to 20 months without them. The volunteers pictured here are helping with the library's RFID project. That's our radio frequency identification project. So we need to tag 40,000 items in the library, and they're helping us do this. And also the last photo there of the stairwell, that was a project that was funded through the Osprey Foundation and the Friends of the Library. So we're grateful for the many provincial and regional partners we have who supported our efforts over this last year. Provincial partners support staff and board training and consortia purchasing of our digital resources. And our local partners help with our shared programming. So I'll pass it over to Annie.
Here's a picture of our current board, which consists of 11 trustees. We've also recruited a resident from Area E to join the board in a non-voting capacity. This position is key in advocating and expanding and supporting services within our Area E. Unlike others, our board rose to the challenge of meeting virtually. Not easy when volunteer trustees are also juggling work and family and other commitments, which are also online as well. But we're grateful that guests such as our Area H and F directors and at another time Selkirk College leadership met with us online as well. In the new year, our board will be embarking on strategic planning. We're going to focus on refreshing our key values that matter to and motivate the board, staff, and community. Outreach will be a priority to further understand the collective impact of our library in our communities. Trends that have surfaced this year include a province-wide discussion regarding public library governance leadership, vision, and actions for reconciliation and relationship building. And as a hub for information and community building, the library is a critical part of the response to the climate emergency. We'll be considering these in our new strategic planning sessions. The stats that Tracy will now share are indicative of how the library facility is being used and will also be taken under consideration for strategic priorities going forward.
So as we don't have all our statistics for 2021, these numbers were pulled from our 2020 annual report. So it just gives you an idea of how well the library is used or is being used even in amongst a pandemic. And in 2021, we're seeing a continued growth. So to demonstrate trends that we saw before the pandemic and that are starting to return now that the library facility is open, I've charted stats from 2015 to 2019 to demonstrate these trends. So people are still coming to libraries, but they're using them differently. It's no longer just a place of a transactional action, right? It's not just about checking books out anymore. It's really about the dynamics of the library and how that's changed by adding a relational side to all our processes. So libraries are shifting from focusing on that transactional service and have become relational, which creates more value for our users. The library is no longer defined by the number of books on its shelves, but rather how it's being used. People are staying longer, they're participating in more events and programs. It's now about being a living space for our users. So even though we were open 24 hours less than in 2019, our collection was only down, our circulation was only down by 16%. Events are 30% less, but it's really quite impressive that we managed anyway to host close to 300 events, most of them online. Our online resources, they're increasing a whole lot, but that's no surprise. And just to share a provincial stat with you, Nelson Library always lands in the top 10 of online circulation in the province for online stats, right? So that's not per capita, that's just overall. So we're hitting way above our library, really. So this trend will continue now more that people were introduced to our online books during the pandemic, and we've adjusted our budget to reflect this. Our users expect to have a robust collection of both physical and digital collections, but this is difficult considering digital content often costs 3 to 5 times more than a physical item. Since the library returned to regular hours in July, we're seeing our numbers increase monthly, including patron registration, the number of people coming into the library, and the number of items borrowed. So membership, I'm just giving you a breakdown of how the library membership is made up. So total library membership equals approximately 54% of the population of these areas combined. So I'll pass it over to Annie again.
The board passed this budget at our November meeting. It accounts for a 5% overall increase. The largest dollar increase is for staffing. Staffing makes up for 76% of our budget. In addition to the negotiated wage increase, this budget supports an addition of a part-time assistant chief librarian. In October, a staff resignation provided an opportunity for Tracy to explore our existing staffing organization. After speaking to his staff, reviewing the budget, and researching staffing makeups at similar-sized libraries around the province, the advantages of creating an part-time assistant chief librarian, a part-time office clerk, and increasing hours to existing positions proved more advantageous than rehiring for the empty position. The advantages include succession planning and having an additional person to help with advocacy, including funding at a provincial level, finding and managing grants, helping support city priorities, governance, and moving the library's indigenization plan forward.
The assistant chief librarian would help manage staff, including hiring and performance management, and oversee tech programming and assist with vacation coverage. The library has on average 15 employees, plus some seasonal employees as well during the summer. And also there's volunteers. At present, I'm the only non-exempt library staff, and all 15 employees are my direct reports. So library staff are talented and innovative library leaders in the region and the province. We want to continue to support a community that expects a high level of services. An assistant chief librarian would provide additional leadership to support library staff and make the library's extensive services more sustainable. Libraries and librarians are great magicians. We're great at stretching dollars while continually expanding services and programs. But magic is only so powerful, and we've reached an end to what we can do with what we have. So I'll go on to the budget here now. And I'll just speak to the line items with major differences between 2021 and 2022. So operating income, the greatest reduction in this line item is overdue fees. This has been happening annually for over 5 years due to our automated system that reminds people when their items are due, and we've also introduced a new automated renewal process. Many libraries, in fact, actually regionally, provincially, and even internationally have done away with fines altogether to reduce barriers that prevent people from accessing reading materials, especially for children. Operating grants include funding from the city, the regional district, and the province. And I'll leave that to the next slide for more details. Donation and fundraising. As pandemic restrictions gradually ease, we're predicting a return to regular fundraising activities in 2022. And we have a transfer from reserves for our strategic planning that Annie spoke to earlier, and some programming funding that will be carried over from 2021. On the expenses side, we talked about salaries and benefits. And as Annie mentioned, this makes up 76% of our library's budget. The 2022 budget includes the negotiated 5% increase for 2.5 years, which was from August 2020 to December 2022. And it also includes funding to support the staffing changes I spoke to earlier. Library management includes interlibrary loan service, which is well used, and those fees are continuing to rise. Due to COVID, the last two budgets did not include funding for staff training or attending conferences, but we expect this to resume in 2022. And lastly, as mentioned earlier, the board will be developing a new strategic plan, though those costs will come from our reserves. Equipment and furnishing is reduced in order to find some savings. And programs increased just a bit this year, and that's in hopes that we can start to return to more in-person library events. And $1,200 of that is carried over from our 2021 budget. Our collections, that's both physical and digital. Although this item is the same from 2021, it's been reduced gradually since 2018. Not because we've seen a decrease in usage, but again, as we don't have many areas in the budget where we can find savings, most other expenses are fixed. It needs to come out of somewhere, so we do pull it out of here. And I'll pass it over to Annie.
This slide includes the past 5 years for greater context. Tracy's worked closely with the city's finance department, thank you Chris and Gioconda, to develop this budget. The board is asking City Council to support this budget as presented. Implementing the staff changes would take effect in January. The budget includes a 5.75% increase from both the city and RDCK areas F&H. The increase goes towards supporting the staffing changes and the negotiated wage increases of 5%, as mentioned. Historically, the city and RDCK provide a 2% increase. The dollar difference between the two is approximately $21,000 for the city and $6,000 for RDCK. As outlined, the staffing changes include a part-time assistant chief librarian. We hope to make that a full-time position in the following years. So I think this concludes our formal presentation, and we trust that that's provided you with an overview of the value and community impact of your public library and the rationale for an increased request. And Tracy and I welcome your questions, of course.
Annie, when you say RDCK, you mean defined area of RDCK, right?
That's right.
ENF,
Yeah,
part of H.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
F and H.
F and H, yes. sorry.
F&H.
And none of E.
And,
None of these?
yeah,
No. We live in
no.
the non-library supporter part of the world. In Area E.
That's why we have recruited an Area E non-voting member on our board to help with that advocacy.
Thank you. Good idea. All right. Annie and Tracy, thank you. And so I'm sure Council have a couple of questions for you, and I'll open the floor up. Councillor Woodward's first, and then Councillor Luchtenberg.
Thank you for the presentation. It's more of just a comment, and it's anecdotal because it's my own experience with my own family. I just really wanted to communicate to you that during these rather difficult couple of years we've been experiencing, like within our own family and with people that are in our friend circle, like the library is a vital, or has been a really vital connection. Because we've been so isolated especially because of COVID and then also the climate issues. And so I just wanted to, we feel very grateful every time we go into the library and it's open and it's operational and it's bright, and it's our 8-year-old son, just loves, going in there, and it's a real highlight for him. So I just wanted to thank you for keeping it going through what must have been or has been some of the most challenging times, I would imagine, for a public space like that.
Right.
So thank you for your efforts.
Thank you, Jesse. I'll pass that on
Thank
to
you,
staff
Jesse.
too.
Thank you.
Yeah, kudos to our staff for being so flexible and creative, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Under some very, very hard conditions. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jesse. Councillor Lockenberg.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy and Annie. So a couple of questions that are not quite related to each other. The first is related to the RDCK's contribution. From what I'm seeing, the City of Nelson's membership is 66%, and the city's contribution relative to the RDCK's is about is more than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want the breakdown? Sorry.
Yeah. On a,
So the city's funding is 68%,
yeah. Okay.
and the membership is at 66%. Area F is at 9%, their funding, and their membership is at 16%. Area H, 6.5% in funding and 11% in membership. And if we dig down a little bit deeper for Area E, they don't provide us a guaranteed income or guaranteed funding every year, but they do. Annie and I meet with Director Faust each year to talk about library services and how Area E can support that. And primarily, they give us a grant of about $12,000 each year, and most of it goes to ensuring that school-aged children can have access to the library without having to pay a membership fee. So that equates to about 1% of funding, and their membership is at 7%.
Right, but to be clear, somebody from Area E can use the library without any membership, any fees paid at all.
Yes,
So-
certainly. Anybody can walk in the library, sit down, borrow a magazine, use the computers, use the
Yeah.
Wi-Fi.
So are we making any additional efforts to redress that imbalance? I mean, the city seems to be carrying more load relative to the RDCK than seems fair. I guess that's not your responsibility so much as ours.
But certainly it's both ours. And Annie and I and Sarah will be meeting with directors Popoff and Newell and the CAO of the RDCK, and hopefully Director Faust will be there at the beginning of December to talk to them about library services. Our funding agreement is overdue, actually. During COVID, it ended, so we extended it for another year with that 2% increase. But we'll be talking to them about an actual, a bump of 5.75%. And with Area E, each year Annie and I speak to Director Faust, and she talks, I believe she understands the value of the library and what it means to her community, especially during COVID, right? So you didn't have to make a 20-minute trip to come to the library. You could access it online. All our programming is online. There's a great value to people living in the rural area as well. There was a referendum in 2010 and people said no, so.
Yeah, I know that's a challenge with Area E in particular, but I know for a fact that there are many parents that rely on the libriary from Area E to have their kids spend a couple of hours after school to hang out. So it would be good if Director Faust can better address that. The second question I have.
I just want to clarify, because I think when you look at the taxation versus usage, because I think Tracy referred to the overall percentage of the revenues, but some of that's coming from the provincial government that subsidize everyone, right? So we're actually, of taxation, city residents are paying 78 to 80% with 66% usage. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's even more extreme. Okay, so the second question I had, just to clarify, you said the digital content costs 3 to 5 times more than physical content. Can you explain that a bit?
Sure. So, not much to explain other than that's the cost that publishers are asking libraries to pay for a digital item. And digital items are they're just like a physical book right? So if you borrow a digital copy of the latest Stephen King novel,
Yeah.
only you can borrow it, right? Like, so
I see.
Counselor Page can't be reading it at the same time. So it's just like a physical book. And they know they're popular, so they're increasing the cost for digital content.
Okay.
Is that-
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, that helps because I was thinking a Kindle, it's always cheaper to get a digital book. than a
Subscriptions.
physical book, but
Right.
I understand. Okay, that's really helpful.
And there's different prices for libraries compared to an individual as well, right? So it's libraries purchasing.
Right. Right. Okay. Okay. Can I ask one more actually on the budget? We're seeing an increase in library management of 30%.
Yep.
And you did touch on it. There was something related to travel within library management.
Well, yeah, for the last 2 years, we didn't have any, there was no money budgeted for staff training,
Training, right?
right? Which included a bit of travel to conference.
Right.
So it's at $5,000 for 2022, right?
I see,
Compared to
okay.
0. And then also in here is board expenses like strategic planning. So
Okay.
that's in here as well.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
But the strategic planning, the funding, or the cost for that, the expenses for that will come from the library reserves. But it's embedded in here.
Into the expenses. Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further questions? Hearing none. Tracy, thanks very much for your presentation.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
again
Thank
for
you.
your support.
And Annie, thank you very much for all the time that you've spent with the board. And many people may not know the good work you've done to form those partnerships with the regional district and how you've worked on that over the years. So thanks for we appreciate your help.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. Pardon me? Yeah, move receipt of the presentation. Councillor Woodward, Councillor Renwick, all in favour? Carried. Thanks very much. Thanks, Councillor Morrison.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All
guys.
right, last but not least,
Chief Donovan.
any means, the Nelson Police Department budget. And Chief, you have a helper with you tonight.
Yes, a supporter.
Supporter.
But you can
So
come on
I-
up, you can come on up closer.
Want to come up
Yeah.
as well?
You want to, yeah, just pull your chair right up here.
So most of you probably know, but this is Director Sue Adam, one of our Nelson Police Board members. And you were along with the Deputy Chief presentation a couple months ago as well, so. No, some very interesting presentations this evening. I found myself at the back thinking of questions and some interesting points where I can see some of the overlap with the policing and some of the issues that come with, again, living in a beautiful community that's attractive and people want to come and live here and stuff. So certainly a lot of positives and a lot of good things, but it certainly creates some other challenges and things that we need to deal with. So, as Mayor Dooley had mentioned, this is my first budget presentation, so certainly interested in some feedback and some, I guess, what maybe was of interest during the presentation. I've tried to do maybe a few things a little bit differently. After I've looked at some of the past presentations, I've kept some of the content just again for context and comparison to what many of you might have seen in previous years, so that you kind of know where we stand with some of those things. And as is the case in a lot of businesses, the expenses and the costs really revolve around the human resource part of the business or the service, and policing certainly isn't any exception to that. So it's a little bit more heavily concentrated on the resource side of things and some of the challenges there and some of the reasons that there's a need for the resourcing levels. So one of the things I like to pass on to people is, oftentimes I think the common perception of policing is that it's very enforcement driven, that we are basically an agency that's looking at enforcement, laying charges, but really that's sort of our third priority. Our first priority is preserving quality of life in the community. And then the second piece is preventing crime, preserving peace, and protecting lives and property. Along with that comes a fairly big piece of education. Strive to kind of continue to develop areas, look at alternative ways to deal with things, dispute resolution. Restorative justice is another one. We also are looking at setting up a diversity advisory committee. Those things take a lot of human resource hours. The effects, I think, are well worth the effort and time that you put in. Sometimes the unfortunate thing, though, is that work isn't accounted for the same as enforcement, which is very statistically driven, and lots of times funding is based on the enforcement piece alone. So it's just something to keep in mind. So the vision of the department is a safe community through policing excellence. These are a couple pieces that had been in previous budgets, and just to show kind of the consistency there, that the policing portion of the 2020 operating budget was 20%. The policing and protection portion of the 2021 budget was 19%. I think we saw a little bit more elevated costs around some of the COVID pressures that were put on the department, some of the additional equipment and things that had to be put into place, and calls for service changed over that year. There was some dynamics that I think took a little bit of while to get used to how to deal with them. Probably took a little more time and effort. So again, just to show the policing value to the community has remained pretty consistent over the last 10 years or so. Budgets have stayed in that probably mid 18%. 2020, they jumped up just a little over 20%, and 2021 back down to about 19% of the city's operating budget. So fairly consistent, even though the pressures have continually increased, and as some of the other slides will show, calls for service and some of the other demands for time and resources on the department have continued to increase. For everybody's awareness and knowledge, a few of the areas that some of the funding goes to pay for, we have 24/7 service call response with our internal dispatching system. We've added a beat officer in the last couple of years and continue to hear very great things about that and continue to try and augment that. We had a second beat officer assigned, but again, just due to some of the other pressures and that, it was very difficult to keep that second beat officer consistently downtown. But it's certainly one of the things we want to continue to focus on going forward, because we hear nothing but good things about it, and I do think there is certainly that real bridge with the community there, and I think there's a high level of crime prevention, or at least mitigating the crime levels that could take place if the officer wasn't down there visible and interacting with the public. We've put in a community policing sergeant, which also doubles as an admin sergeant, so that's taken a bit of the workload on the administrative side off some of the operational staff, allowing them to have more time on the street and doing investigations and things like that. We've promoted a staff sergeant about a year and a half ago now. The senior NCO is responsible for all the operational parts of the department, including the 2 platoons, the beat officer and the GIS section, which again is another area that we continue to see increased pressure and demand for, just as the level of investigations and the crime becomes more complex, and it just becomes more complex and the need to have a focused investigative team that has knowledge and the ability to have that skill set to not only investigate it, but then put a very high-level product of disclosure into the Crown. Very technologically, high technological requirements for a lot of the cases now, and cybercrime continues to become a more prevalent issue that we're dealing with, and that not only involves the use, and I've gotten 2 calls this week about warrants out for my arrest for CBSA packages or not paying my taxes or something. So, there's that piece where technology is used as an instrument to perpetrate crimes, and then there's the second piece where technology is a target of crimes. So that's where your malware, cyberware, ransomware, attacks you might see on government agencies or hospitals or things like that. And unfortunately, that's becoming more and more of an issue, and a great strain on police departments all across the country to try and manage and mitigate those things. So again, that's one area where we're trying to see where we can expand on and be most cost effective as far as mitigating that risk, because they're very expensive and very time consuming investigations, and unfortunately have a very low percentage of being solved because they're perpetrated from often state sponsored or other countries around the world. So it's very difficult to track those back. So again, we're looking at strategies around trying to mitigate some of that before we get to the stage where it happens or we have to investigate it. We have an integrated regional victim services program. That's very effective. Regional detention and remand facility. One area, and I'm sure you're all aware that that's one area where we had obtained a significant amount of funding that we used to augment a lot of the programs in the department. COVID has certainly had a significant impact on that. We started seeing some of those prisoners and that come back, and the revenue coming back a bit from that this past year, but with the 4th wave, everything kind of took a few steps back again. So we're still hopeful that that's something that's going to return in the future, but it's sort of yet to be determined to what extent that's going to happen. I'm confident that it will get back, maybe not quite to the level that it was at one point in time, just with courts getting more used to video appearances and stuff, in particular for first appearances. But the courts still like to see people there in person. So I think, as I said, I think we're going to get back somewhere 80-90% of maybe what the capacity was at one time. West Kootenay Integrated Regional Safety Units, and that's an integrated unit with the RCMP. We have 1 sergeant and 3 constables there now. They're an excellent resource to have in the community, and they are provincially funded, so that doesn't really touch our budget line in any way. Bylaw enforcement, we've had the addition of 2 new officers this year, where we had 2 very well respected and senior officers that decided to take a well-deserved retirement. But we've got some good enthusiastic young people that are in there now and well on their way. The reserve officer program is another area I think where we get good value for basically a volunteer program. There's a little bit of funding for a few special programs, but they truly have been a godsend this past year with some of the protests and some of the park patrols and things like that, where we certainly needed that little bit of more officer presence, and they've come and filled in. Unfortunately, again, it's a volunteer position, so lots of times they have other jobs and things. So it's even though they're a great asset, it's difficult to count on them or expect them to be there during the day when they're trying to earn a living. And lastly, the Restorative Justice Program. We have the halftime coordinator and the halftime school coordinator. Great program. There's been a change in the coordinator's position this past year. Kathy Citrone, many of you probably know her, or maybe know her husband that works for the city as well, but she's well on her way to learning a number of the restorative justice programs, and seems very eager and interested in it. She already has her other job with the school district, so she has good connections in the community and with the schools. So, as I said, I think that's going to be a very strong program when she gets settled in and gets familiar with things and up and running. So some of the interesting things that I have put into this presentation that some of you may know and some of you may not know. I like using charts because it gives you that kind of visual impact of what we're looking at. This table shows the 5-year average for charges laid and calls for service in a 100,000 per capita population. So as you can see by looking at this, Victoria has a very high call volume, but I think what most people wouldn't recognize or know is that Nelson, on a per capita basis, has quite a high call volume as well, and higher than Vancouver. Same is true for the charges laid per 100,000 population. Victoria is a bit ahead of Nelson, but Nelson is, as you can see, is ahead of Vancouver. And then again, if you look at Central Saanich and Oak Bay are two communities that are similar in size to Nelson, so we're often compared to them, but really there's no comparison as far as the call volume and charges laid. And this chart also shows the person's charge per 100,000. So again, you can just see on a per capita basis, Nelson is one of the highest charging departments in the province, and again, significantly higher than Vancouver. Some of the areas that we've been trying to work on just to reduce some of the cost and maybe share some of the workload or redirect. I know mental health is one of the areas that we're often questioned on, whether police should be involved in mental health calls, assisting our provincial partners in that. Again, I think there's a lot of merit to that discussion, and I think there's a lot of value in looking at other ways to handle that. But as I said in the last time I was presenting here, I don't think it's an area where police are ever going to be completely removed from, just because of the risks that are involved in it and the unpredictability of it. We want to keep working with our provincial partners for them to take the lead on addressing some of the issues, but we certainly don't want to leave them in a vulnerable situation either. So we'll continue to be going to those calls. We also take part in the fentanyl task force. We work with the outreach workers in the community as well as Nelson Cares and community groups like Anchors. We use, as I mentioned, volunteers where we can, civilian for non-policing duties, and as I mentioned, we've engaged more reserve officers, and we're looking at training some more in the coming year. They are, as I said, a great asset to the department, and especially when we can use them in planned events. We had been using a part-time officer this past year to cover off for injuries and staff shortages. The part-time officer, unfortunately, was working probably more than full-time hours this past year with just some of those shortages and pressures. And I distinctly recall one day where the only two other people besides myself working and taking calls was the staff sergeant and the part-time officer. So again, he was a great asset, not necessarily used in the capacity that he was initially hired for, but we were certainly glad to have him because we were running on a pretty skeleton crew for a few times. We've also been using local resources for training, bringing in trainers, doing cross-training with other agencies and group training. And as of recently, we've started increasing our internal training capacity, so officers within the department that have skills and have got those skills to the level where they're actually recognized as trainers. And I'm also looking forward to the new deputy chief when he gets here. He's a trainer at the Ontario Police College and has some great experience and teaching in the major case management skills and investigative technique skills. So that'll certainly be a great asset to the department and will help with the development, especially of some of our younger officers. So the police per population is a standard that a lot of police forces use across the country to kind of gauge where they're at. with the number of officers that they should have in a community. Again, looking at this graph, you can see Nelson is quite a bit lower than both Vancouver and Victoria, even though as I said, on a per capita basis, Nelson is busier than Vancouver. We've got significantly less officers per population. And then the bottom slide shows kind of the inverse of that. It's how many people each police officer is expected to police in a community. So with Nelson, we're up close to 700 people per police officer, where you're looking at probably across the country, 1 officer per 550 people is kind of the average. So again, this all plays into the population and the population growth of the community. Again, as we've heard a couple times over the evening, it's a beautiful place to live. Certainly a lot of attraction to come and live here. The last census was in 2016, and the new census should be coming out probably mid-2022 here, so we should have a good read. But the BC government website shows, based on a number of things that they take into consideration, their projections for the population in 2020 was just under 11,600 people in Nelson. And with a 2% growth rate, that's been kind of the average over that time period, that would put the projected population of 2022 around 12,000 people. And, you know, one of the other things that's always hard to account for is that core population, or the population that uses the city. So as we'd mentioned, a lot of times we have people traveling from surrounding communities. One report that I read that's a few years old estimated that the population in the daytime could grow as much as 50%. So we're looking at then potentially around 18,000 people in the community during the daytime, either here for tourism, work, or shopping and things like that. The next slide, and you're all probably as familiar or more familiar with this than I am, but I just want to demonstrate how many housing projects and new accommodations are set to come online in the city in the next year or two. The first 6 lines or so there show projects that have already started or have even just finished and are starting to look at tenancy development and growth now. And a conservative to moderate estimate would put that at about 250 to 270 occupants. The last slide there with the 306 proposed units on the Granite Point golf course, obviously that's a little bit more longer term, as I understand it, over the next 10 years or so. But I think it still shows the sustained growth that the community has experiences and expecting over the next couple of years. So on average, and again, it equates to that 2%, the community is growing at around 250 to 275 people per year. Along with that comes the work pressures and the calls for service that continue to grow with the population. So one of the concerns that I have being here for the past almost a year now, the department has one of the highest caseloads per officers in the province. It has the second highest call volumes and charge approvals per capita in the province. It has one of the lowest police to populations of any municipal police department. Almost 20% of the staff have been out this past year for a significant period for stress or mental health related reasons. And the other 80% that are remaining were experiencing that same level of stress and demand, which is now increased with some of the staff being off. So fatigue and stress continue to contribute to physical injuries and conduct matters. And another aggravating factor, little over 50% of the workforce now is entering that retirement age. So, I'm not expecting a mass exodus right away, but at the same time, we have to be prepared for the fact that over the next couple of years, up to half of the workforce, either through years of service or age eligibility for retirement, are hitting that level. So certainly some succession planning and strategic hiring around either exempt officers to get that mid-service level, but also looking at the next couple of hires probably being recruits to get that junior level of service, get them starting to develop with the experienced officers before they're gone. And the fact that it's also a bit of a bonus that they're significantly lower wage off to start with, so there's some cost savings with that too, with the senior members leaving and junior members coming. Right now, one of the pressures we have covering off for staffing levels is training requirements that continue to increase. The provincial standards continue to increase, which requires more training, so more time away and more shortages on the schedule. And with the senior workforce, their holidays are more than a junior workforce would be, so that contributes to some of the issues with scheduling and having shift coverage. One of the positive things that I'll say about Nelson, the police department is very diligent, very good workers. They have one of the highest clearance rates in the province, but unfortunately you also notice that the trend has been somewhat decreasing over a couple of years, and recognizing that the clearance rate was slightly higher in 2019, but I think some of that was with COVID, and we had a little bit of probably a third or quarter of the year anyways that we had a bit of a slowdown in calls for service, which did allow a lot of police forces to kind of catch up on some of those investigations. So, one of the few positive things, I guess, that came out of COVID, but I think the trend overall is just because of the increased workload, the lack of ability to be proactive or diligent on the investigations, it's potentially going to continue the trend of the clearance rates declining. The proposed org chart that I sent is not in actual position yet. What we're looking at with thankfully the approval by council and the addition of a deputy chief who will be here in January, I think that's going to have a significant impact on helping with some of the workload, streamlining things, looking at new and innovative ways. I've had a lot of discussions with the new deputy chief already on some of the innovations, technologies, and efficiencies that he's worked on in his former job, and some ideas he wants to try. So I certainly see around note-taking and disclosure and things, he's got some great ideas of how to, as I said, streamline those processes and free up some of the time for officers to be back out on the street. I want to reintegrate along with the BEAT program, I guess, a member to engage more with the outreach on the street. I think that'd be a good augmentation for the BEAT program, what it's already achieving. But I had the fortune, I guess, to meet some of the outreach workers when I was out walking with the BEAT officer a week or two ago, and had some good conversations about some of the stuff they're working on, and certainly where I think the police and them could work together to deal with some of the community issues. And again, that goes back to that crime prevention and being a little more visible and a little more hands-on with those sometimes the more vulnerable members of the community and some of the marginalized community. I want to reduce one of the sergeant's positions, and this chart shows that sergeant position gone. That would be repurposed back into a constable position. That would allow us to have that third beat officer, but it also gives us that flexibility on the two platoons to have some additional coverage and support for some of those training needs and some of those just unfortunate things that happen where officers get hurt on duty and other reasons are off work. That brings us to the budget slide. A couple of things to point out. The $97,000 difference on the NPD staff secondment recovery piece. Just so you're probably aware, but it's a bit of a wash. Again, we're not paying for that, so even though there is an increase in that cost, it's not passed on to us or to the taxpayers of the city. So that's covered off lower down where you can see that the $97,000 salary is covered by the $97,000 in secondment recovery. the one significant increase and the biggest increase revolves around the addition of the deputy position. That cost isn't solely the deputy, but again, I think that certainly was a need, and appreciate that that position was approved for the department. There is some additional cost for some other salary and support work that's being done within the department, and a little bit of a salary increase for the admin side of the department. The second increase, the $43,286 there, the majority of that is for anticipated wage increases that will be established in the, it's been pushed back a few times now, but probably early in the new year, the contract negotiations. So anticipating just kind of what the other departments in the province have been getting, there'll probably be, very likely a similar wage increase there. And this also accounts for the, I think it was a very good plan that Colin and former Chief Burkhardt had started a couple years ago, where they've been putting in roughly 30% of a cost of a new member each year for the past 3 years. So that'll allow us to add the one additional constable, which will bring, currently the department says 18. With the deputy chief, that'll put it at 19, and with the additional constable being added next year, and we've already started the recruit interviews for that, so it'll be a recruit, so some cost savings there. It'll put the department at 20%, or sorry, 20 members. That brings us to a little bit, we're still about 10% lower than the Canadian average for police to population. Right now we're at about 156 constables per 100,000, or just over 15 per every 10,000. The national average is 18.5 constables for every 10,000, and Vancouver has 19.5, and Victoria's 20.5. So we're about 20 some percent, just a little over 20% less than Vancouver, who's our comparable for work-wise, and about 10% less than the national average. So as I said, with those additions, that'll bring us up a little bit higher. We'll be at 16.5 constables per 10,000, or 165 constables per 100,000. If that all makes sense, and I'm throwing a lot of numbers out there, but as I said, it's I know policing is an expensive business, and certainly based on what the call volumes are, the population is projected to be at the average. The department should have 22 members, and if you equate that to a comparable number that Vancouver would have, there should be 23 members at the department. That would put us basically on par with what the workload requires, but certainly happy to get, do it in increments and try to continue to work on some cost-saving measures and some partnerships with the community. So thank you, and I'll answer any questions if you have them.
Thanks, Chief. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm keeping an eye on your Janice in case you have a question, so we will catch you if you get your hand up. So Councillor Woodward, Councillor Charlwood, and Councillor Lockenberg.
Thank you, Chief. I think as you were running through this, the thing that kept coming to my mind is sustainability. That trying to find this balance of sustainability for the department seems critical, because having people coming and going, leaving, going on stress leave, all these things cost money in the long run. And so in a way, I feel like if you could reach that equilibrium point, or that sustainability point, it actually is more affordable, or sort of it has an affordability over the long haul, because you aren't dealing, you're kind of lurching from one thing to the next.
Yeah, it's more cost effective, just
kind of rate smoothing we've used for other parts that we deal with. So do you feel that this is do you feel confident this budget is pushing you towards that sustainability that you need to run a department, over the next bunch of years?
Yeah, and as I guess I'm to be upfront about it, I'm somewhat laying the groundwork probably for an additional ask of 1 or 2 members over the next year or two, and then I think given everything being equal and sustained growth in the community and things like that, we're probably looking at 1 member every 2 or 3 years after that. But I certainly think, in 2015, Lapine did a study, and it was an excellent paper that he did on that, and I reviewed it again here this past week. But he looked at a number of these issues: the workload, calls for service, the ancillary pressures, the extra community demands and stuff. And in 2015, he recommended the department should be at 19 officers. And we've seen a 1,500 to 2,000 population increase over that time, plus COVID since that time, plus a lot of the social and civil movements that have also increased scrutiny and demand, and the time the officers have to spend dealing with each call. So, in 2015, we should have had 19. We've had all these significant increases on demand and population on the department, and really we're just hitting 19 now. With the addition of a recruit, 6-8 months down the road, we'll be at 20. So, I guess the long answer to your question is, I think we're definitely going in the right direction, but I also don't think we're quite there yet. And I do see that, trying to have that balance of, keeping the value to the taxpayers and having good quality service delivery, but understanding the strain that it puts on the department. Sometimes, you start seeing some cracks, and it does concern me that at times that there's other people that, aren't long for potentially needing to take some time off. So it certainly is a balancing act, and I think we do need to be mindful of that. And to your point, much like I heard them talking about some of the dikes, the cost of, building them up and maintaining them a little better over the past few years would have been money well spent as to the significant costs that they're going to incur now. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Chief, for the presentation. I had 2 questions. Maybe I'll ask them both, and then you can answer them as they make sense to you. The first is going off of just your comments around emergency services, given the flooding that happened. Is much time put in your department talking about what those threats are to our community going forward and how that might impact the service you offer? And secondly, going back to your stats on charges laid and calls for service, you're using those to compare us with other jurisdictions. Curious to know about the types of calls we're getting and the types of charges we're laying, and whether that is an apples to apples comparison. Does that make sense? So if we're comparing to Vancouver and saying, well, we should have this many officers if we were doing comparable work, are the types of charges being laid and the calls coming in, do those break out the same across jurisdictions?
And I'll answer your second question first, if that's all right.
Okay, sure.
And I did forget to mention that in the presentation. So across the country, they keep what's called the Crime Severity Index. You may have seen that, but basically how that works is they assign a value, I guess, to each type of call. So more serious calls, damage to property over 5,000 scores higher than damage to property under 5,000. Same with frauds and things like that. As you move up the chain, violent calls have even more significant or higher value and score. And then obviously you can see the progression as the violence gets more serious, the score is higher. So the Crime Severity Index, although probably not a perfect system, it's certainly a good system for comparing the types of crime and the apples to apples comparison of, specific, numbers of calls don't give you a true sense of how busy a place is or what types of investigations, because, some investigations are very short investigations and some investigations are very complex and very long and take a lot of resources. So there's 325 police departments that they compare across the country in cities and towns of populations over 10,000. Out of those 325, Nelson had a crime severity index of 98, so we were 98th or in the 30th percentile of all the police forces across Canada. So we're in the top 30% for serious calls and higher demands on police department type calls. So as a comparison, both Vancouver and Victoria were higher than us. You'll have to forgive me, I don't remember the exact score they got, but it was 65-ish. So again, they're higher than us, but again, that probably equates somewhat to, even though population-wise and charge-wise, why we can kind of get by with 165 officers per 100,000 and they need 195. But certainly, I think that gap is larger than it should be. I wouldn't say that we need to be at that same level of police to population that Vancouver has, but volume-wise and comparative-wise, I think we are in the same realm as them and should probably be a little bit closer to them or closer to the national average of police to population. Sorry, did that answer that question? Okay. And then the first question around disaster planning or preparedness, we've been doing quite a bit of work with the fire department and the fire chief and the emergency planning coordinator for the city. They've had a bit of changeover, and then obviously some of those planning sessions that we started in the spring kind of got interrupted with the significant fire season we had. Not that there couldn't be some flooding in the area into some of the lower lying parts of the communities here, but you'd probably agree that the bigger threat here is probably the wildfire situation. So we work with the fire department. They've obviously got a little bit of a different role than we do, but we're heavily involved in the evacuation planning and some of the maybe the preventative portion of it. This past summer, bylaw and police both were a little more proactive in enforcing some of the fire bans and checking the homeless camps and things like that to ensure that there wasn't fire hazards that were being left unchecked needlessly and things like that. So fire certainly is the number one area that we concentrate on in that realm, but I do think it's a good reminder that there's a number of other things that could happen, and we probably need to be a little bit more mindful of some of the other areas we could probably prepare for.
Thank you.
Councillor Lachtenberg.
Thank you. So Chief, U.S. has seen a 30% increase this year, or was it last year, in murders and violent crimes. This is the highest increase in its history. And the analysis has been showing that it's a combination of the pandemic as well as the unrest around the murder of George Floyd. Is that unique to the U.S.? Have we seen anything like that in Canada? And is it possible, if we haven't, that we're sort of just lagging the U.S.? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I can comment on that, and I guess I also have to admit that it's probably more anecdotal on my part than specific stats or anything. I've certainly seen those tensions increase between my former role and here across the country. There's certainly been an increase in domestic violence and those types of incidents. Probably don't need any explanation around them, but just that, confined and people being expected to stay home more time in their domicile and with the same people consistently, it tends to exacerbate those already bad situations. So certainly there's been an increase. I've also seen stats on it and personally seen the increase in, the level of confrontation with police. Certainly we've experienced even here in Nelson and specifically in the last couple of weeks, some of the situations that have come up where police are openly challenged and people seem to be, and again, I'm sure it's a small percentage of the community, but unfortunately, it's a bigger percentage than I think it's ever been, that in my memory and experience, where people want to openly challenge the health orders. They want to openly challenge some of the charter rights issues around protest, and I guess push their agenda and their feeling that, unfortunately, their rights to do and say what they want trump everybody else's rights to do and say what they want. And it certainly puts the police in an awkward position where I don't think some of the de-escalation skills and things that we do know, and I think members employ them very well. Unfortunately, some people they're not there to get their point across. They're there looking for a confrontation, and as I said, I've seen a fairly significant increase around that, and I think that translates into a lot of other areas of the community. Funnily enough, I was off and just downtown on Sunday, and a fellow walking down the street decided he needed to yell and berate somebody because they had their mask on outside. That's, what was the point of that? And, I went over to check and make sure the fellow was all right and stuff. And he's like, well, did you see that? It just kind of caught him off guard, because he said he just walked out of a store and he was checking his text on his phone and hadn't taken his mask off yet. Not that he should have had to, but somebody out of the blue just decided that he wanted to yell at him and swear at him and call him some names and tell him, what his problem was and why do you think you need your mask on outside. So, as I said, those confrontations just seem to be, in a more tense society right now. So I think your point of things may be lagging and we might see some increased violence and stuff. I think the potential is certainly there.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Janice.
Yeah, I got her. We were just talking.
Sorry. Oh no, it's Janice. Excuse me.
You got a question?
After Janice, maybe.
Go ahead, Janice.
Can I ask my question?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, thank you very much for the presentation, and I have a couple of questions, and one is in terms of looking at recruitment. I mean, as you look to have potentially over the next number of years, increase in staffing in the department. I'm just wondering what the impact is in terms of being able to do recruitment when you look at some place like Surrey, who's going to a municipal force and suddenly needs to have such a large uptick in members. Is like, do you see recruitment as an issue going forward for a force like ours, a municipal force? And my second question is probably more philosophical, perhaps, and that is it's quieted down in Nelson a little bit, but around these defund campaigns, personally, I'm not in favor of them. I actually think that other levels of government need to improve funding for mental health and social services. It shouldn't be stolen from protective services budgets, but I'm just wondering if there's an impact both sort of on a personal level for the members, and whether or not you see that as a disincentive to actually becoming a police officer for those in the future. They're kind of connected, the two, but they're kind of two different questions. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and thank you for those questions. They're very valid questions and certainly good questions. So a couple of things. I think maybe to go back to the issues around, I guess, why somebody would still want to join the police and some of the societal pressures. I didn't want to keep jumping back to my former role in the RCMP, but I traveled around to a number of detachments at that role, and certainly at the height of all that, a lot of members were feeling very discouraged about their career choices and about doing a lot of what they felt was good work in the community, and then kind of being really scrutinized for it and challenged, and a lot of people painted with the same brush. As that played out, though, I was very happy to see a number of communities really stepped up and were very supportive of the police, sent some very encouraging and flattering letters, not only to the detachments, but to myself at the headquarters. So I certainly think there was a time when that had a significant influence, and I think all the police departments probably felt that somewhat in their recruiting efforts, trying to, convince people that it was still a good career choice, and that the vast majority of the population still, I think, are very pro-police and very supportive of the police. And, in some sense, I think it's almost done a 180 where I think those silent majority of the people that a lot of times wouldn't say anything or step up and say they supported the police or appreciated it have started to do so. In the last couple of months here, I've received half a dozen letters from different people in the community thanking specific members for various things, or thanking the department for various things. So, it's certainly encouraging to see, and I think, as I said, it was nice that, it's too bad it takes something like that sometimes for people to recognize the good work that's being done, but I certainly think it's been happening now. Interesting you bring up the Surrey Police, because part of my BC Association of Chiefs of Police webinars and things that we have quite regularly, that's a significant discussion, especially in the Lower Mainland area, because as you well have guessed, there's only a certain number of police officers, and the Justice Institute only has the ability to train a certain number of officers per year. So there's certainly going to be some challenges there. There's certainly some pressures that they're all going to have to deal with, either police changing departments or going to Surrey. The experience that might be leaving some of the departments, probably the shortage in recruits that they can get, but then having training officers and the capacity to train that significant number of new officers coming in. The positive about Nelson, though, is, and one last thing I should add there too, some of you may have seen that Victoria Police actually had basically a signing bonus for anybody that came over to Victoria Police. You got a $20,000 signing bonus just for coming. So that kind of shows the pressures that departments are under trying to hire people right now. We're very fortunate here. We had the latest recruit drive we had for one position, we had 12 applicants, and yesterday they just finished interviewing 5, and I would say all 5 of them would have been good hires. Unfortunately, we're at the stage where we can only hire 1 at the moment, and potentially a second somewhere well into the year. But still great interest here. Back to the point of so many people love the community and the area and the amenities and the ski hills and everything else that come with it. We regularly get resumes from people in other departments all across the country that are looking to come here as exempt officers too. So, knock on wood maybe, but there's more good people applying here still than I can hire. So that's certainly a positive.
Right.
Further questions, Councillor Page?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, and looks like we'll be building or working towards building up the force over the next few years. Kind of picking up on some of the conversation that's been had around the table around those opportunities that the community is having to, or lack of opportunity the community is having to kind of work out the difficult issues of the day. I kind of, looking at the funding there for the restorative justice piece, that was like a program that was implemented a number of years ago, but still kind of in a green new state. I'm wondering how that program is operating, how some of those opportunities that maybe would traditionally go through more of a punitive traditional policing program for justice. How are we utilizing restorative justice? Is the program going well? Are we developing it? Are people going through the program? Is it having good outcomes? Is it having bad outcomes?
Yeah, it's been a little bit of a challenge, and I'll admit we're kind of we've kind of gone back to a little bit of a starting over phase. But I do see the progression in it already, and there should be a video coming out very shortly that has shown some of the successes this past year with the restorative justice program, in particular the incident that happened at the high school at around graduation time last year. Some very poignant and positive things in that video. So I'm not sure what the schedule is on that being out and available to the public. If it isn't already, it should be in the very near future. Sorry, I'll maybe just ask you.
I don't know when it was going to be published. I think it's been approved, but I don't know when it is.
Okay. So should be soon. That's one piece of it. We've started trying to be a little bit more proactive on getting the referrals. That seemed to be kind of where the hiccup was over the last year or two, was some of the sources that would generally be the referral. So the file given to restorative justice to look at and then do some preliminary inquiries with the victim, the offender. It certainly has to be agreed upon by all parties involved before it can be successful. So, sometimes we run into hurdles there with victims that, don't understand the program or the benefits of it. And, we obviously need to do a better job of publishing that and explaining it. So that's sort of step one, is taking the few successes that we've had recently and making sure that the public's aware of them. Making sure they understand the benefits of it, and make sure that they understand the benefits of it from the victim's perspective. There's a bit of a misconception that oftentimes it's sort of a get out of jail free card for the offender, and they just have to show up and apologize or go through the motions of it. And we've certainly seen, not only with the restorative justice program here, but just in the restorative justice process, a lot of the offenders, certainly I do think, get the benefit out of it. And a number of them have said, they thought they would do it because they didn't want to have a criminal record, but in the end have come back after they've gone through the process and said, they do feel bad about it, and they're glad that they went through the process, and they're glad they had the opportunity to have that chance to make amends with the victim. And but again, you need people that are willing to go through the program to start with. We're getting referrals or trying to get more referrals from the Crown prosecutors. They're in a perfect position to kind of see, especially first offenders and stuff, which ones they feel would be best to go to restorative justice. The police department, I think we've dropped the ball a little bit on, not necessarily because we were not wanting to participate in the program, but just being busy, and that's sort of the routine, is just to go through. If you have the evidence, you lay the charge, you put the court package together and send it in and move on to the next thing. So what I'm implementing in the department is each one of the platoon sergeants who has to review every single one of the files that come through their desk while they're on their set of 4 days, 24 hours coverage of the city. Once that's done, they're meeting with one of the restorative justice personnel and discussing, and we're trying to say, pick half a dozen files that you think might be appropriate for restorative justice. Then with the discussion with somebody from restorative justice who understands the process better and what they're looking for and criteria, can make those decisions with the platoon sergeants as to which ones are appropriate and which ones they should move on to the next phase, to see if they can go to the restorative justice. Because I think right now it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. So I think by having that, weekly meeting with restorative justice personnel, it's going to plant that seed that they always need to be thinking about what other alternative resolutions can we come up with some of our files. And I'm, it's small numbers, but I've already seen an increase in the files that have gone. We've probably gotten more referrals in the last 3 months than we probably had in the last year. So we're sort of starting over, but it's going in the right direction. And I think it always takes those couple of wins to get that momentum. And I'm pretty confident that the program's going to keep growing, and probably this time next year, we should have a pretty robust program.
Great. And just to I guess not overly a follow-up, but a separate. So we've been seeing, I think, a lot in the broader scope of things, how the online environment has created opportunity for various characters across the globe to play an active role in the kinds of crimes that are committed in our community. I see it every day at work with people subject to cybercrime in terms of their being grifted of their money. We see it in the kinds of personalities that are invited into town and the money that they generate for the trips that they do. And there seems to be a common theme, and this is probably, I'm asking for a pretty opinionated response from you, Chief, now that you're a year in. But we see a continual kind of campaign or narrative campaign to undermine the trust in our institutions and what institutions we have. We sometimes talk about this at the library. We talked about it a little bit at UBCM. And that ongoing erosion, I think, creates additional challenges for our community to understand who they can go to for help and how to best approach and deal with the challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis as they grapple with what is and is not true when faced with the problems of the world. As you kind of look at our city after sitting here for a year, is there anything that comes from your experience that we're missing opportunities, or there are places of gathering where the police force, for instance, is interfacing with the community, or programs that are being operated, or places to get closer, to get in front of youth and get them before things happen, or to resolve various intergroup conflicts before they get to a further phase? Like, is there a diagnosis or anything percolating on how we can grow the trust and try and win back some of the hearts and minds? Because it's not isolated to just the police institution. It's not isolated to just libraries or public health orders or hospitals or anything. It's kind of across the board as people are having, pretty advanced conversations with groups that are not in their local community and not face to face. And we see I would say we see the outcomes of it on our streets every day. So how do we as a community build back institutional trust in ourselves and the people around us in our community?
Well, it's kind of the $1 million question. I'm like,
In 20 words or less.
yeah.
I'm sorry.
All of our jobs easier.
Yeah. No.
You should bring the board.
Well, I think if I can answer that, I have a very bright career future somewhere. But yeah, because I know exactly what you're saying, because I look at it quite regularly. And in fact, my son, who's 17, and I have lengthy conversations about some of these things. And, he's very attuned in some areas, but, very influenced in other areas that we talk about. And I often think that just even within my own household, how do I sort of, allow them that freedom to read and research and listen to other people's opinions on things, but not be drawn completely off, and as a lot of people say, down that rabbit hole of conspiracies and that there's all these ulterior motives within every faction of society. It's very challenging, and I certainly don't think there is a quick fix solution to it, and I don't think that there's a one answer solution to it. It's something that, I think we need to play the long game at and just continue to show that level of measured approach and try to keep some rapport. From a policing perspective, we certainly have that challenge of dealing with protesters and different groups, and I know probably some of the individuals you're speaking of that come into the community that you don't necessarily agree with, but you still have to uphold their fundamental rights and their charter rights, free speech and stuff. And I guess in reality, at times, use that discretion for not enforcing every little law that they are probably violating, with the greater good in mind of maintaining some kind of a relationship with them, being able to make some requests that, you've compromised on a few things that, you know, can they not push the issue on these couple things? And we've been pretty successful. Is there a few things we'd probably have done differently? Possibly. But we've managed to keep pretty good rapport with most of the groups and keep it civilized and keep them from blocking traffic or intersections for any significant period of time. And although at the time it might be frustrating, I think that's, in the long run, the approach that still wins over. And hopefully calmer heads prevail. And I guess just the, I think, you know, maybe the scientific or the medical community sometimes, you know, not to put it back on them, but needs to fight fire with fire a little bit and try to do a little bit more proactive campaign, I guess, as to the counter argument to some of the groups. But you know, unfortunately, there's always going to be radicals that continue to promote their ideas, and often for their own benefits. And as I said, I think it's just the long game of trying to keep working with them, and hopefully reason prevails in the long run. I know I didn't answer the question, but
that was as close as anyone was ever going to get.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Chief.
Thanks.
Any further questions? Hearing none. Chief, thanks very much for your presentation. And Sue, thank you for coming down tonight and accompanying the chief. And I just want to say that we're blessed with a really good board, our police board. And Sue is a workhorse on our board and does a lot of great things for us. So thank you very much, Sue, for all your good work. And she's never behind the 8 ball when it comes time to put her hand up to help out. So
And I'll
thank
just
you.
echo that too, that she certainly steps up all the time to help with things like this or any support that I need, so I appreciate it as well.
Thank you. All right.
Move to receive?
Is there a motion to receive the chief's report? Councillor Charwood, Councillor Lochtenberg, all in favour? Carried, thank you. We'll have a short recess because Kevin's got a few things he wants to go over.
Council reports.
Yeah. Oh, you want to do council reports?
Before the break?
Wouldn't
Mind a couple minutes. Wouldn't mind a couple minutes.
I know, that's what it's.
He's already taken off.
Oh, are you leaving?
It's nearly 10, so might as well just do
I know
the
the
break,
Rick,
come back.
did you want to leave it to the next meeting, Rick? Your
Yep.
report? Anything else? Because,
I would rather just give my report and get it done with.
Can you keep it to 1 minute?
Yeah, well, I can keep it to under 5.
I just want to, I feel like once we reach like 10, it's diminishing returns because we're tired. We've been here a long time. We started.
We have one issue we need to.
Okay.
right, yeah.
Less like, you know what I mean? Like.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
Thank you.
All right, so committee reports or council reports, starting with Councillor Page.
Well, we're doing it? Okay,
Go ahead.
have a seat.
I'm just.
Okay, so I just want to go through a list here. I won't get to, if there's questions, have questions. I know there were questions about AKBLG, so I'll give a preamble for the public's benefit that there will be a convention being planned in April, end of April, for the Association of Kootenay Boundary Local Government, which is going to be under the theme of Future Ready, and that is the association of elected officials from here to Golden, to Revelstoke, to Cranbrook, and Roslyn, and everywhere in between. And so this will be our AGM, and it has been long delayed, so everyone is super excited to have Nelson be the host for that convention. Over the course of since our last meeting, we've had a number of meetings that you've heard me speak once or twice about. So we've had the strategic planning at the Nelson and Area Economic Development, where research into successful housing programs and consideration of implementing them was discussed as a strategic priority. Implementing for the business retention strategic goal at the NADP, the priority of implementing the arts and culture sector economic study recommendations. When that comes out, council will remember that we had initiated that reporting through the NADP and are looking to have those recommendations come forward. So we should be ready to catch those and carry some of that when it does happen. Workforce shortages, which you've already heard a few times, are definitely a concern over at the NADP as people are struggling to find and align their workforces. At the Cultural Development Committee, again, arts and culture strategic planning has been requested. We had a group of the arts and culture sector leaders at a meeting, I believe at the start of this year, or maybe it was the end of last year. And so they are continually looking to carry on a wholesome community discussion about where arts and culture planning is going in the city of Nelson. There was also a topic brought up about the state of the banners along Baker Street and Vernon Street down at the four-way stop. Things are looking pretty tattered. I think we've got some seniors games from 2006 or 2011 hanging on Vernon, but like there's some,
Can't remember.
there's some tidy work if we're going to be a community. We've got festive lights up, the banners are tired and from games that have come and gone in some decade or more. So there's thoughts around that. Housing Committee, we talked a little bit at our strategic planning about the recommendation coming out of there, and we'll continue to work at that at the NADP table. And under the Nelson Next, so myself and staff, along with the climate change Nelson Next implementation crew, we met around the Hendricks right-of-way neighborhood garden opportunity and how that could be incorporated into taking some of the soil amendment. So some additional planning is being done on that to see if that whole neighborhood can be brought together to do a project. They have a pretty we had that at council, but the group has come together in a much more cohesive way and have a very very good plan that they have worked on together. And the Youth Center is interested in carrying some of that work with the Nelson Next group, Nelson Next staffing group. And I guess the only other thing, I hope I'm keeping this under 5 minutes, is the AKBLB has sent a request. Kevin will have received it if he checked his email at any time during this meeting. They would like to partner with us to run a thought exchange on modernizing forestry engagement specifically. Everyone probably got an email from the province asking for an engagement strategy and a written submission to what could change around modernizing forestry. And so the AKBLG, in our board discussion when they were in Nelson a couple weeks ago, I suggested that we look to see if we can leverage Nelson as a partner to run such an engagement for the area. And then that would inform what the written submission would be from the AKBLG by just keeping it to the members. So I hope that council would be approving of using the tool in that way. There's a tight time frame, but it's also going to be a very limited pool of people who would end up using it. So that is my report.
Thank you.
It's a really quick question for Councillor Page.
Yeah.
Really quick.
It's the answer that could be a problem.
So we've talked at this council table about influencing the AKBLG, given that historically the AKBLG convention had a lot more input from the city in terms of the structure and the content. And I think there's probably an interest for us to have some influence there. And you had said that the board had sort of taken back control of the convention and more than historically, which is fair.
Yeah.
Having said that, it looks like the appointed staff person who's organizing the convention has sort of just sent out a broad request for presenters, which seems to me rather unfocused and sort of drifts away from the opportunity that we have to really use this as an opportunity to have and demonstrate Nelson leadership in terms of future planning, in terms of creating regional coordination, regional partnerships and stuff like that. So is there an opportunity to have a bit more influence in the direction of the AKBLG convention?
So I will say that there's a local conference committee of the host city that's been struck, which includes myself and staff to basically the response areas of responsibility, because this is first and foremost the AKBLG's convention. They're the ones operating it, and as the host city, they see our role as throwing a very good welcome reception, having heavy input on what kind of tours are done, and having giving, and I've taken everything that you've said, conversations with the mayor, conversations with you, in terms of what we want to see in Nelson next, and how that collaborative, challenge-based, future-ready state is where we want to go. And I'll tell you now, the fact that future-ready is the theme, from what it was going to be the theme, is conversations that I've carried and said, let's change this, let's get this, and got us on that theme. We're very much focused on enacting that from the presenters. So the coordinator certainly is throwing out a very broad spectrum in an unbiased way of like who wants to present. We do look at it very closely at the convention committee on the AKBLG side to say what fits. Like this is our theme, this is what we envision, here's the subtext, as we've talked about. And we will look through those presenters and we will pick out the ones. And if there's strong ones there where we think we need to nudge them, we had this conversation over the last two planning exercises for both the spring of 2020 and the fall of 2020 about making sure those presenters are going to present to us based on our theme, not based on they sent in a presentation and your theme's great, but here I have this presentation ready. So I think we have a lot of suggestive power. And Kevin had certainly suggested that we try as much as possible to link what tours were happening with a presenter that would reinforce that. So as that process continues to develop, I'll continue to try and make those linkages as strong as possible. But it is a regional association, so there will be other presenters outside of that band. But yes, that opportunity I think continues to exist, and I think like I was saying, if we can support and show a collaborative effort here in helping run a more regional feedback process through thought exchange for the modernizing piece. I think that'll, win us a little bit of goodwill there anyway. But I think we have lots of goodwill. Everyone's excited to come. We're a progressive city. We're all about climate change a lot of the time. They want to see that too. Like that's part of being the host communities. They're in our house. But they're our guests, and it's someone else's birthday party.
Yeah.
We also talked about the potential to have sort of an add-on workshop that we could
host.
Yeah.
See that's the kind of thing that I think we should be looking at. Also, UBCM Climate Action Committee and UBCM Executive had talked about going to these regional conventions like the AKBLG convention to take and to help present and convene these sort of regional future strategies, both on the adaptation and the mitigation side. And then that got derailed by the pandemic, and I don't think it's been picked up since. And so when the mayor had suggested that, and we had sort of all talked about that this would be a great opportunity to sort of spearhead that, thank you for bringing that. And I would say that something that we've talked about in the past at previous conventions was that a lot of these conventions are just about like going and you listen to a speaker and you get bored out of your minds, and people don't need to be at this point educated more, and yet that seems to be the default with the convention. Like, I'm going to listen to a speaker and get educated, where what we probably need is a convention that's more about like actually making things happen, like coming up with plans, like having these sort of side meetings where we're like, well, Kimberly, what are you doing and how can we work better together? So if you can help facilitate that kind of convention, I think that would be pretty exciting. It's something that maybe we'd all benefit from regionally.
Well, we also talked about, is there an opportunity, and I agree, right? You go away and somebody speaks, even if it's interesting, it's kind of out of your head by the time you get back to your community. So we certainly talked about, as Councillor Page suggested, is how do we link the tours, and housing is an example. We have one of the most progressive housing policies in this country. So if we're going to go tour people laneway housing, and and if we had, for example, Pam talk about how we got there, what we did, what policies we have, et cetera, and you go out and see what's on the street. There's a laneway house, there's a duplex, there's a this, that, we talk more about, the opportunity to do that, and somebody walk away with a real workbook of, here's how I do that.
That'd be really good.
So I'll just leave it on one note on that is, I haven't brought all those pieces together, but when we look at the Nest Lab and what that social innovation structure looks like, whether it's a bookend workshop, as many of us participated in at AKBLG in Castlegar the day after, that was part of the structure, is that the day before and the day after there were more intensive workshops to and Community Energy Association threw one about climate change story narratives and how to build them, and it was all very interesting. I would love us to see doing something similar, either as a presentation or as a workshop on either end. That is the Nest Labs, and taking that social innovation structure and seeing how we can't do that across the region. Maybe they do a presentation in collaboration with 100% renewables, and instead of just 100% renewables doing a presentation, it's like, how do you explore these questions as a community and bring people from all walks of life in and say, you're all elected leaders, but you might all have different political stripes, but you all have the same challenges. How do you want to deal with homelessness? How do you want to deal with the pressures of climate change and energy insecurity? And then see if we can't. I think the real challenge, quite honestly, would be, how would you fund that take that as a stepping stone and fund it for a year, so that there was convening that continued to happen remotely amongst that group of people who participated. I think that's how you would get to where you're proposing we get to, but that's way outside of the scope of convention. Convention can just offer an opportunity for a stepping stone into that bigger strategy.
Yeah, the only thing I suggest there is, the only thing I would say would be, I think we can offer up some really innovative ideas. And it's been my experience going to conventions, if you relegate a good idea to before or after the convention, you won't get the participation.
Mm-hmm.
Because in our case particularly, like, you've got a job, you've got a job, you've got a job. Like, people are working, so they don't come to the Friday thing, and they have to go home for work on the Monday. So good ideas should be in the body of the convention. Let me just give you one example at the last FCM. So the last FCM that I went to, I noticed this workshop on embodied carbon. I thought, that'd be interesting. But it was one of those side things. It wasn't, but ironically enough, I came back and I talked to Kevin about it. And I was hoping we could have got that guy to do a workshop for us, on, this is before Zoom came along, but what the hell were we calling it? Whatever. Skype, yeah, Skype. To talk about, and here we are, like, when was that? 4 years ago? 3 years. Here we are 4 years ago. Now we're finally talking about embodied carbon. We could have been 3 years ahead of that conversation, right? In having that conversation, right? About educating people on the embodied carbon piece. So I'd be careful what you'd relegate to the day before and the day after, to be honest with you.
Eventually.
If you have something that you want to get out there that's, I just felt that we're probably at a stage right now where we are, as a municipality, at a point doing things that I honestly believe we have an obligation to pass them on. And to pass them on in a bit of a sideshow on either end of the convention, I don't think is doing justice to some of the things that we're doing. It's just a thought.
And I only mean it as, I would fight to have it anywhere. I would fight for it in the body.
Yeah.
I agree with you. And if I failed that, I would fight to have it as a workshop.
Anyway, thanks, Keith. Thanks.
Great.
I have 5 more minutes.
A motion to, unless there's other, motion to adjourn this part, and Kevin's got a few minutes for us in the next one. Councillor Woodward, Councillor Page, all in favour? Carried, okay. If you want to go for a pee or whatever,
I think we can be
your legs.
real quick.
All right.
Oh, wait, whoa.
Okay, the motion to reconvene. Yeah,
Okay,
so.
hang on.
Yeah, we can just, maybe you can write.
This is all.
Oh, we're still in.